Right, good afternoon, everyone. If you'd like to take your seats, we'll get started. My name is Matt Smith. I'm Vice President of Global Entrepreneurship Network. Very happy to welcome you to the Gen Research Summit 2025 at GEC. I'm going to be quite brief because Ted will go into far more detail as to the history, background, and objectives of Gen Research and what we're hoping to achieve today. The research side of Gen has been active for many years and has for a long time, or since day one, been very heavily aligned with Kauffman Foundation and the research agenda. And indeed, right now, we continue to receive the support of Kauffman in our research and policy efforts. When we first launched the research network, or it's gone through various iterations, Gen Research, Global Entrepreneurship Research Network, it was a recognition that there needed to be greater collaboration and coordination between researchers, policymakers, and practitioners to drive the impact of research and kind of create that positive circle of impact to ensure that the research is being translated into better policies and better support for entrepreneurs. And that's really at the heart of Gen's interest in research and the interest in bringing you together today. Delighted to be here in Indiana. I want to thank our hosts, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, for joining us, for hosting us even. We have an amazing panel, I think, as you've seen on the briefing pack. And we've got the honor of actually breaching a whole load of breaks this afternoon to actually have an entire 3-hour window where we can deep dive into some of the most foremost thinkers on entrepreneurship research. So I'm going to hand over to Ted and let him run proceedings. Ted Zoller has been a long-term friend of Gen's on the research side, a distinguished academic, practitioner, and more. Delighted to have you running this session and leading the Gen research community. So please, Ted, over to you.
Thank you. Matt and Tom, I just want to thank you both for all you've done to bring us together. If I had a party, this would be kind of the party I would want to have. You know, it looks like the Star Wars, bar scene, right? I mean, we're all kind of different, but it gives us an opportunity to really bring things together. I want to just start the session by saying, what's different about this group? How is this group different than any other group that you've been affiliated with in terms of the mix of the people in the room? Anyone want to try a shot? We're not all the same. So how many of you would say you're pure play academics? You're researchers. What you do is teach and research. Pure play. Okay, how many of you would then loosen that to say, I'm an engaged researcher. I'm someone who gets involved with the community. How many of you would be that ilk? Yeah. How many of you really don't do research, but you consume research, you leverage research, you use research in the real world? How many of you don't give two hoots about research? You're obviously not in this room. Okay, so Jonathan and Matt and Tom and I, we all got together and said, okay, what's the place? All right, here's the other problem. Many of you, I've got my mentor, Kelly Shaver, here, and so many of my friends around here, and I want to thank you, everyone here. If I had a room that would facilitate crosstalk and conversation, this would not be the room. But, what I'd like to do is suggest we're all at the table, we're all communicating. There is no back row. We're all here to share and learn. What I want you to feel our pain for a minute. We're trying to figure out a place for the Gen research. And if we were to try to play in the let's generate strong empirical research, we'd be bumping into what organizations? SMS, Academy of Management, Babson Research Conference, right? We are not that. We are not the place that's going to convene academics to do research. Is there a guidance system for how research agendas are formed? That's really what we were trying to do with this organization, because it's where practitioners and engaged scholars can communicate with pure play scholars to help navigate the path of the future. And today's format is kind of a kickoff of a new role for GERN. The concept is that we can start to lay out an agenda for future research that will have the highest social impact by way of prosperity, opening opportunity, our cultural transformation that's occurring, really rebalancing opportunity worldwide. And the other thing that's unusual about this meeting, and I want to apologize for our colleagues who weren't able to come because of certain things going on with our immigration system. This is a highly engaged global format. This is the first time we've been, Tom, we've been in the United States for 22 years. Isn't that right?
2008.
So it's really impressive we're here. We have to be completely protective of our purely global focus. So the role of GERN will be helping to facilitate the conversation between the research community and the practitioner community with a future focus. Does everyone understand that? Does that seem like a logical place for us to be playing? I hope we have value add. So we've set up 2 panels just to start the conversation, but everyone is at the table. Everyone is in the conversation. The first panel kicks us off to start to lay out, if I had, if I were, maybe able to make the decision on behalf of the research community, I would go in this direction. But this comes from the market, coming from the practitioner community. And the people who are engaged with policymakers, the people who are engaged with philanthropies, and the people who are engaged in the practice. And we have 2 top leaders who can start our conversation. The first speaker, and I've asked just for 5-minute brief overviews.
Should they introduce themselves?
I don't think we have time to introduce everyone. But all of your bios should be on the app. And we've got some incredible people in the room. I will call out a few people. I called out Don Karatko. Don Karatko is a mentor to many of us, has been one of the champions of entrepreneurship from Indiana University Kelley School of Business. David Su from Wharton. Jeff Hornsby from University of Missouri, Kansas City. Rebecca White from University of Tampa, Kelly Shaver from the College of Charleston, and my old alma mater, the College of William and Mary. I could keep on going. Norris Kruger, you guys have got Jeff Reed from Georgetown. If I went around, it would take us all day, because you're like, to me, the deans of our discipline. Josh Lerner from Harvard. But we've asked a number of you to speak. And we'd ask all that are not on the panel to also engage. And I've actually seeded the meeting with a few people that I've asked to provoke the best conversation we can have. So we're going to reduce the distance of this room pretty quickly. How's that? All right, so we're going to start out with kind of a 5-minute, kind of a very focused provocation by Amelia Hopkins Phillips from SOMO. SOMO plays a very unique role in East Africa, and I want first, if you could share a little bit about your mission, Amelia, and then share with us your direction.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. So just to share a little bit about SOMO first, we work with micro and small businesses in East Africa. We build accessible technology for these entrepreneurs, learning, reporting, and investing tools. And we then finance these businesses. We provide non-commercial forms of financing where we utilize data to be able to do that. And lastly, we build shared resource centers so that businesses don't have to invest in infrastructure right up front for their businesses, and they don't have overhead costs at those initial stages. So that's a little bit about what we do. I come here as both an entrepreneur myself and also an ecosystem builder, practitioner, working with businesses across Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda mostly. And I think one of the things that I've seen with research, I think when I started working in East Africa about 14 years ago, one of the things that I noticed was a lot of the research that was out there on entrepreneurship just was not applicable to the environments that I worked in. I remember reading one article that was talking about how what existed in the geographies I was in wasn't actually entrepreneurship, because people were starting it from the place of need versus the place of innovation and creativity. And I was coming from a Silicon Valley background. I had lived in that world, and I didn't really agree with the fact that, I saw Yo, an app that was like, I think valued at like $5 million back in 2015 that was sending Yo back and forth to each other. I didn't find that more valuable than the businesses I was seeing that maybe were built out of need, but were building real businesses that could be passed down from one generation to the next, and had real business models that were sustainable and had the potential to grow. So just looking at what I think is needed when looking at the research community, I think often that how do you actually make the data that we're accessing accessible for your average entrepreneur across these geographies to actually be able to input that data, provide that data, and also have ownership and find value from that data themselves. So just some things with what we do at SOMO to allow that to happen. So one thing that we've noticed is the tools where data is being collected are not accessible to a lot of entrepreneurs. And so building technology that actually allows them to be able to access it using what they would usually use. So for instance, we build technology using USSD and quick codes, which is how a lot of our mobile money works. And that allows us to collect financial impact and social data from entrepreneurs using the basic technology they usually use. As well, we'll use voice-enabled services so that we're actually, both accessing data through voice systems, but also being able to provide that in local languages, local dialects, and using the way that people communicate generally. So that's one key element that we've noticed of, when a survey is sent out over a mean that a lot of entrepreneurs don't use, you're just not going to get more nuanced information from these entrepreneurs, because you're going to get it from a small group of entrepreneurs that are building businesses in a more formal economy, in a more probably Western way of building businesses. So that's one area. As well, looking at who owns that data and how that data benefits the entrepreneur. I think this is a really big one. A lot of times we find that data is extractive and it takes from the entrepreneur. They never see that data again. We still face this at SOMO often, where our entrepreneurs will be like, well, we're reporting for SOMO. And so getting the value back to the entrepreneur of what is the value that they're receiving from that data. So it might be data insights, it might be what they're learning about their business, but more importantly, I think often it's like, what resources can they actually access? It's a pretty practical thing. And so making sure when that data is being collected, that there's actually something going back into the entrepreneur. So again, just giving examples of what we do, we build alternative credit scoring systems, utilizing our data where we automatically generate scores for businesses, using that financial impact and social data that we're collecting, which generates real-time scores for the entrepreneur, aggregated weighted scores that we then use for providing financing to businesses. So we provide that in a non-commercial way to those businesses to get them from that informal, underbanked stage to a stage that they're more formal enterprises that can start to grow.
Is that
I can call on also. I would love to. I would love to call on some other. I know there's a lot of practitioners in this room. I would love to open it up to anybody else who runs an entrepreneurial support organization, who works with entrepreneurs in that type of space, to share their experience as well.
One of the takeaways, and I don't want to necessarily preempt the conversation, but one of the takeaways from your talk, Amelia, is that you're leveraging data in situ. It's happening while you're engaged with entrepreneurs. So the data is being collected. And do you have a research community already leveraging that data for insights? And how do you leverage those insights? The question you're asking everyone else is, are there examples out here of data that's being leveraged in the field that are researchable in your practice areas?
Yeah, exactly. So on the first one of the research, how it's being utilized, so we build our own data analysis as SOMO, and so we'll use that with a bunch of our partners directly. We don't directly engage with any research communities as of now, but we build those insights ourselves as SOMO. And so we have real-time dashboards where you can see all of our aggregated data and on our businesses and start to gain those insights.
You know what they say is researchers will work for money, but they'll kill for data. Are there any other examples like that people would like to cite that data is available for research purposes or could be made available based on real-time processes? Feel free to contribute. Chris?
Can I comment very briefly, Ted? So Chris Haley, Startup Genome. I've got a few other hats that I wear as well. One of the big things that I have been occupied with over the past few years has been accelerators and incubators in the UK and across Europe. And really policymakers crying out for better evidence of the impact of these things. We know in the abstract that accelerators can be super effective, but actually demonstrating the value of individual programs is quite difficult. I see a massive opportunity that I would like us to maybe think about in terms of connecting those programs with academics who can do the analysis. So many accelerators and incubators do have quite rich data sets of the startups that they support, the organizations that apply to them, but they simply don't have the time or the capacity to do the analysis of that. So I think there are quite rich opportunities to connect those with academics.
Yeah, and actually just something to mention on that. So we've started to work with other accelerators and incubators to be able to provide these tools to them. So we've started to do that just in East Africa right now, but have actually explored doing that even as far as Europe too. And that gives you obviously a much more robust then data set to use as a academic institution or researcher. So yeah, definitely something we're interested in.
Please.
Thanks for the overview. I'm Dr. Chad Renando from Australia, both Gen Australia, University of Southern Queensland, Startup Status, and Ready Communities. A couple of points. About 8 years ago, we built a data project to support accelerators, incubators to measure their impact, but then the results of that data would be then de-identified and go up to the funders to create a decentralized data acquisition model. Really interesting, but one of the challenges that we face as we roll it out is you have a customer, which is, say, government, who's funding the programs. You have a user, which is the incubators, which are financially distressed, and quite often have the capability and competency to manage that kind of data and impact evaluation, which is really hard. And the other challenge that we faced was the custodian of the data. So once you have this data, it has to be a trusted kind of third party that doesn't necessarily have a vested interest. Because again, founders having a resistance to actually supplying their data if they know that might be weaponized or used against them in any sort of way, taxes and things like that. Some of the solutions that we've played with, Dr. Charlie Moyle with QUT was working with Scott Stern in regards to evaluating the impact and creating an aggregated data point, which then go back to government data to be able to provide an interface between government data and the free market dirty data, as we call it. So data custodianship is big, and the other point I'd make is just data interoperability, because there's heaps of different platforms, different programs out there, either from Genome to GEM data to others, and how do we get the common data points to aggregate together so that we can all share data, especially as new free market models come up?
Yeah, I think maybe just to comment on that a little bit, I think it's really helpful when it goes back, obviously, to an entrepreneurial support organization or a government to better those services provided to entrepreneurs. I think beyond that, though, an entrepreneur often will not see that as benefiting them directly. It might benefit the system, and it might make it better for entrepreneurs coming down the line from them to be able to access better services, but it might not directly benefit them and their business. And so I still think there needs to be a value to you provide this data, what happens for you and your business. You know, we're all, as much as we would love to think of ourselves as one big community and we're all looking out for each other, everyone has an individualistic side, and they're also responsible for other people who work for their business and making sure that business grows. And so I still think that value back to the entrepreneur is an important thing beyond the community as a whole that's supporting them in one way or another.
I'm a business professor, so I cold call, and there are a few people I know that have a lot of experience in this area. So the takeaway is, from a program, Amelia, this is your theorem. As a program operator, manager, leader, think about the data backbone, think about ways that you can transcend beyond just evaluating the program, but think about what are researchable insights that can improve the intervention in such a way that you're actually producing greater value. So it's almost intentional on the part of the program leader to design their data array so that it could be leveraged for research and insight. Is that right?
Yeah, I think though there has to be a more immediate result of that research back to the entrepreneur. I think research obviously takes a long period of time, and obviously depends on what type of study you're doing. But we live in such a fast-paced world now. An entrepreneur doesn't want just, that down the line, this is going to help your business. They want kind of these immediate insights back. So whether that's insights on their business or a value for their business in that real time, that's something that entrepreneurs, I think, are going to be expecting more and more to be able to gather data from them.
I know 3 researchers in the room that have that specific issue. I know Kelly Shaver worked a lot with the SBDC community, and you also worked with the panel study, PSCD. I'm probably thinking of a paper a long time ago. Sammy Desai, where's Sammy? Sammy, you've wrestled with that, running research for Kauffman, helping them understand how to integrate researchers into the program stream. I'd love for you to share that pain a bit. The other person I think of is Norris Kruger. Norris has done a lot in this area, working with people that are operating. So I'm just provoking you all. You don't have to share, but I know you've all shared that foxhole. So anyone want to contribute? How do you work with operating entrepreneurs to make data available for research purposes? Norris.
It comes down to, in many ways, that asking what are the questions that they want to have answered. And I find time and time again there's a disconnect between what the academics are asking. Reading an entire book of chapters on supposedly ecosystems research, not one of them has ever talked to a real entrepreneur in their lives. That there is a place for archival research, but if I've had any luck, is that what's the question they want answered? And if we can try to answer that, they're a lot more willing to talk to us.
Yeah, no question. And it gives you a lot better insight as well.
Yeah. Is it sending them a short survey and then they call me up? Why are you giving me this? Give me a half an hour to talk to you. And this is someone I couldn't, if I bought him a martini, he wouldn't have given me time. But it's fundraising before data raising.
Right on. That's a great way to think about it. Sammy, could I prevail on you to share a little bit of your experience? Because I know that what you went through trying to run Kauffman's research operation.
So I think part of the complexity is that there is this disconnect between researchers and the users of research. And partly it's we're asking the wrong questions, but in part it's also because we haven't really tried to dig deeper into a lot of the root causes. So access to capital, I think, is a really great example, is we sort of assume that that's always the problem, but why is it a problem, right? What is it actually preventing entrepreneurs from doing? And so I think, the willingness to sort of look deeper is something that we have to motivate ourselves as researchers to do. The other problem is, and I'll mention this later during my remarks, is, we often look at entrepreneurs that have started a business. And so we ask about how they can be helped, and then we wonder why more people aren't starting businesses. And the problem is we often catch people when it's too late. So we fundamentally care about who falls off the path, but we never measure them. We never really talk to them. We're always dealing with people that have not faced such existential problems that they haven't been able to start a business. And I think that's the fundamental disconnect, is you hear ESOs and policy folks saying we want more, but we don't see more. We see what is. And that's sort of, for me at least, that was a big source of just angst, trying to figure out how to get better information to people.
There's really knowledge externalities on both sides.
Just a quick thought here. I really love, I can't read your name, I'm sorry, it's the one that's...
Norris.
Norris, thank you. I really like what you said, and I think one of the many things that's missing is responsible, well-done qualitative research in which you actually understand what you're talking about, at least have some good ideographic data. And I think that that inference engines, today we have inference engines that can be extremely helpful in generating insights, or at least certainly heuristics, from qualitative data. And I think that may be one way of bridging bridging the gap in the very short run, and also meet the requirements for publishing and getting promoted and the other things that we know are the drivers of most of our behavior.
Daniel actually is speaking from a point of experience, because when I walked in here, he was saying that there's an actual diagram of his ecosystem model, and I was in a class in Charlotte last night at 10 o'clock teaching using Dan Eisenberg's model.
I call it a cartoon, by the way, just to be clear.
It's far from a cartoon, because I think it's terribly rigorous. You've done high-quality, qualitative research to understand the various dynamics of ecosystems. So that's exactly a best practice, right, Amelia?
Definitely.
So let's use that as a building block. Your takeaway is bring the researchers into the program world, have the program world leverage not only evaluation data, but also data that could be used to improve understanding of the phenomena that you're trying to intervene. In your world, it would be access to early stage capital, as just one example. And how do we, we've got two different communities, the research community and the practitioner community. They need to understand each other and work together. It's hard. Jeff?
Yeah, just to add to that, though, I think there's a breakdown in the research translation process. Mm-hmm. A lot of us who are academics teach, we run centers, we do programs, we do classes, but how well are we translating the excellent research that's done at big schools like IU and other places into usable research for the people that attend our classes or go to our programs? And so we got to get better at that too. It's just as much of a translation problem as it is getting it to the entrepreneurs. Somebody has to get it to them. They're not going to go look, for the most part, and say, what's the best research on how to finance my venture? They want to look to people like us for that information, and we have to do a good job of enabling that.
Yeah, maybe just to point out, Adenike from Fate Foundation, they do a really great job of this, of how do you translate that data into a really digestible form. So maybe Adenike, do you want to speak a little bit about the Research Institute at Fate?
Thanks, Amelia, for the call out. So we're one of those people that moved from practitioner to research. I had an organization called Fate Foundation. We're 25-year-olds. I guess you would describe us as an ESO. And so about 10 years ago, when we, similar to what Emilia was saying, in our interactions with a lot of our entrepreneurs in Nigeria, when we look at the issues that, when we're doing business consulting and advisory services for them, 2 or 3 out of the 5 issues that they would normally have were issues around policy issues and challenges. So they were sort of outside of the scope of the work that we could do. And so we then started to look around research that existed. And 2 things. For a country as large as Nigeria, we felt that a lot of the existing research was not exhaustive to capture the dynamics and the multi-layered attributes of Nigeria as a country, as some of us will know. But also, more importantly, we couldn't use it. We couldn't use it, not because the information was not insightful, but because, and I guess the way you described it in terms of translating it in a way that was relevant to us, our entrepreneurs, the work that we could do, and the insights that was then relevant. And so we then started, and by the way, I have a background in consulting. And so we then said, well, we've been around 15 years. We have thousands of entrepreneurs we've supported very intensely. So some short form, some deep touch form. And we started to do the research. I would say that in the first 3 years, there was a bit of a pushback because it was like, who are you to be doing research? You're not researchers, you're not academics, you don't understand the space. I mean, right now we have quite a lot of people who are academics who work directly with us. But for us, at the end of the day, if we were looking at research that could not be relevant to us, apply to the work that we do, or was even taking our data, but not also transcribing it back to us in a way that would help us better improve, or even understand what we're doing and the impact and translate it back, then it was a problem. So we started doing our research ourselves. So that translation is really, really important, definitely for the entrepreneurs, but even for the practitioners in the field, to be able to use it in terms of improving, understanding even the dynamics of their work, but also providing better insights that can help them in terms of deepening their research too, their impact too. Thank you.
That was such a great contribution, Danka. Thank you so much. And I just want to also let you know, and even if you're not at the big round table, we have handheld mics, so everyone in the room is a part of this meeting. Norris and then Kelly.
I want to piggyback on what Dan said, because I started out in sciences, and even in the hard sciences, there's the question behind the question. There's the question we ask, but it's maybe not the right one, is to find that that was Richard Feynman's thing. What are the incredibly important questions that if we even just try to solve them, will make a difference? And it is something that you're passionate about, but with talking to entrepreneurs, talking to ecosystem builders, they'll say, oh yeah, we don't have money in our community, whatever. But if you keep talking to them, the real question, they either don't know how to get it to it, or they want to find the connectors. I mean, right now, I don't care about the institutions. I'm focused on the connectors. It's very fascinating, very aggravating, but I think it's something. Well, the people at this table, we're not just researchers, we're connectors. Maybe there's a research study we can do.
But I think you're missing one thing that, Norris, you're probably understating, and the role that you've played, for instance, is that middleware. There are those of us who are researchers, there are those of us who are in the field. The people that are in the middle that work between those two areas are very rare people. And Danka just mentioned that, and Amelia, I think that's your basic thesis.
Thank you, Ted, but my middleware has been growing over the years.
Mine too. We have that in common. Just for sake of time, please, Kelly, please.
This is old news to many folks, but for those of you who have not had the pleasure of dealing with the PSED, there are two things that arise out of that work that are relevant, I think, for this discussion. The first is, it's expensive. Every data point in the PSED cost a little over $200, and it didn't matter whether that was in-person interviews, telephone interviews, email questionnaires with follow-ups, didn't matter. It was basically a couple of $100, and that was back when a couple of $100 was real money. It would be much, much more expensive now. And so it's not really about the questions that get asked. It is in part about the connection that is made with the respondent. And this is the second point. When those of us involved in constructing the PSED took it ourselves so that we could tell people how much time it was likely to take them, took about half an hour. So we lied and said 25 minutes. The average time was 60 minutes plus. Why was that? It was because when we asked questions that got to something that the entrepreneurs were concerned about, they would stop and write down the question as a sort of, oh my God, I didn't think of that. Mm-hmm. And that's what turned it from 25 minutes to 60. And if you are doing research that is well supported and makes that kind of connection with the respondents, you're just going to get better data.
That's really well said. I think of my friends like Josh Lerner, who kills for good data and will pay for good data. And Sammy spent a lot of time kind of hosting projects to get good data. I know that we were working with the Inc. 500 data for a long time, and it was terribly messy data. It was awful data, but it was so encouraging what we could do with it. Talking about infrastructure, I would argue that OECD is probably the preeminent worldwide think tank for research in economic development. And, I'm pumping you up a little bit, John, as a representative of an organization that I think is reasonably well funded to do this work, but it's also well consumed. OECD is used as an authoritative resource for policymaking throughout Europe, if not the world, and we all admire what you do. I wanted to turn to you next, and maybe you could share your role at OECD.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm head of the Entrepreneurship Policy and Analysis Unit in something called the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities at the OECD. We do a lot of policy analysis for government, and so we'll do work at country levels for specific countries, like SME and entrepreneurship policy reviews, or we'll do sort of comparative work. We've got a session on tomorrow about entrepreneurial ecosystem diagnostics, which we did with Eric Stam. Providing data to diagnose entrepreneurial ecosystems. But I actually sort of prepared three sort of observations for us on, a forward research agenda, forward-looking research agenda. From my perspective, what would be valuable? So the first thing is policy evaluation. The starting point is that entrepreneurship policy is a relatively new field in government policy, and there's less reliable evidence on its impacts than there are in other fields of government, like education. So we highlighted that problem in the OECD framework for the evaluation of SME and entrepreneurship policies and programs. And it points to limited amounts of evaluation and a dominance of poor quality evaluation, i.e. without control groups. And whilst that is the case, you've got academics like Scott Stern and Zoltan Axe who've asked whether entrepreneurship policy is bad policy, and whether it's just encouraging those who already want to start a business, and whether it's generating poor quality businesses. You need a response to that based on evaluation evidence, and the research community can be very valuable in building that reliable evaluation base by undertaking high quality evaluations, exploiting the available data and using control groups. And of course that material can be the subject of academic papers, and in doing that the academic world needs to liaise with policymakers, and it needs to work as an academic community in the sense of using comparable metrics and undertaking meta-evaluations. So that was my point number one. What I would like to see is more evaluations of programs by academics. Point number two is on the ecosystem concept. The entrepreneurial ecosystem concept has become popular in recent years, and it's highlighting the role of a range of business environment factors in stimulating entrepreneurship. But there's a problem with the current entrepreneurship ecosystems research in its treatment of causation. And so most of the research that we see is examining ecosystems today, and not how those ecosystems evolved over time. And it's implying that the strong or weak ecosystem conditions that you see today, for example, in culture or finance, are what is causing the strong or weak performance of entrepreneurial ecosystems. But of course, the amount of entrepreneurial finance and the level of entrepreneurial culture is dependent on responding to the level of entrepreneurship. So to identify the causation there, you need to do research over time. And look at improvements and deteriorations and what's causing them. And so what would be helpful is more academic studies that identify the lessons from ordinary regions, I would say, not those with the highest entrepreneurship performance, and how they improved or deteriorated over time. And then the third point I wanted to make was about targeting and selection. So a big challenge for policymakers is to focus their policy actions on the enterprises and entrepreneurs who are going to respond positively to the intervention. But the research is struggling to identify the high potential enterprises in advance from the data on the observable characteristics. And so the development agencies are using the feel of their account managers and client liaison officers to identify what firms to invest in. So the question is whether research can help identify the types of enterprise and entrepreneur most likely to go on to create an impactful business as a result of the support. So it'd be useful to have research that follows the development of the owners of the businesses to identify what are the important firm characteristics for growth, the mindset of the management team, the composition of the management team, what are the drivers of the growth, finance, innovation, trade, digital adoption, and what are the barriers faced as the firm and the entrepreneur develop.
Wow, that's great. 3 points, John. I'm going to mix it up just for a minute, and Kimberly Graham's going to have something to say about this, I think. First one is the paucity of good research, and it's ironic. A lot of people in the academy were not motivated to do evaluation-based research, and a lot of researchers, when we're asked to do that kind of work, will kind of turn up our noses at it because it's not getting us publishable, data sets. So that's a key problem, John, and I'm just putting that out there. The second thing is on the ecosystems. Who here, I'm an ecosystem researcher, I've been at it for about 20 years. Who here is satisfied with where we are in understanding the real dynamics of an entrepreneurial ecosystem? Can anyone even define an entrepreneurial ecosystem with any specificity? Dan, I know you can, right? I know they are. I'm just trying to mix it up. And then the last piece on targeting and selection. We used to call targeting and selection the success hypothesis. Can you interpret causation or maybe different variables that affect the performance of a firm? And that's an old literature, and a lot of us have already abandoned it. These are the things the researchers say, John. Have I hit anyone's nerve? And if you have, please. Betsy first.
So back to Amelia's point from when we started, I think entrepreneurship is traditionally conceptualized as the Silicon Valley, what is going to be something that makes a huge splash when the founders exit. But I think I haven't heard a lot of people talk about entrepreneurs in the informal economy. I've heard you say something about it. I've heard you allude to it. And to me, that's just as important. But how do you get them? Because you either can't find them or they won't talk to you. So that's something that I would like for people to think about.
So not everything's a Silicon Valley model, right, Betsy?
Right.
Okay, makes sense. Kimberly, what do you think?
Hello, everyone.
And tell us who you are, Kimberly.
Okay, so I'm Kimberly Graham. I'm the Chief Innovation and Entrepreneurship Officer at Tulane University. I would say that I'm a practitioner, and my side hustle is research. I recently received my PhD and did my dissertation on ecosystem based off of some of Eric Stam's work. So big call out to you. And I think part of my thrust in doing the research is really trying to uncover and understand how universities are drivers of innovation. And being in this role as a practitioner for about 17 years, I have noticed a lot of issues within the university systems on why and how we develop innovation and support nurturing and, or lack thereof, nurturing environments for entrepreneurs. And so fast forward, I think I'm one of maybe 40 or so chief innovation officers at a university here in the United States. And so we meet regularly and talk about these kinds of things and what our presidents are looking for in terms of impact. And my research, really boils down to the number of startups we create. And so how do you create environments that are supportive of that when you don't have interventions and mechanisms built within the academic units or within the research being done at the universities to support it? So I developed some programs that hopefully inspire our faculty and our students to engage in that. And a discrete example of that is that Tulane has a bioinnovation program. And the beauty about that program, which is funded by the NIH, is that PhD students actually do a circuit and work in different labs, so they get a very interdisciplinary approach to their own research, and then they do a stint in the FDA. And one of the things we wanted to be able to do was to help to support more graduate students. So there seems to be a correlation between graduate students and innovation outputs as defined by Autumn. So licensing, royalties, patents, disclosures, all those kinds of things. And so how do you help to support more graduate students thinking about startup creation and using what they're learning in the lab and from their faculty to spawn an increased rate of university spin-outs? And so we're putting that into practice, and we started a master's program in bioinnovation where we'll partner with startups to learn problem sets and help those graduate students to become part of the local ecosystem. So we're starting to think about the curriculum development that then helps us to support the ecosystem and also engage more students in becoming thinkers about and doers around startup creation.
So Kimberly Graham, I would argue, if you look at the first phase of ecosystems, it was Fred Terman and Stanford. Second generation was Michael Crow and ASU. Kimberly's the next generation, and what she's doing at Tulane is remarkable. And I'm sure there are other examples. I hope I'm not excluding anyone, but we need to be, and for instance, Jeff Reed and what he's doing at Georgetown is another example of really high performance. What Don Karatko has done for 3 decades in Indiana. Anyways.
Yeah, Ted, I would recommend reading Kim's stuff. She has a great model that she wrote. She put into something I did, and doing good work.
And the fact that you reference Eric is really a great way to lead on. John, I just want to thank you for giving us 3 very actionable things to think about. Focusing on good policy research and making the transition from evaluation to research. Secondly, evaluating the ecosystem concept and understanding ecosystem evolution and what affects ecosystem performance. And then the third is how to understand the relative performance growth or success of venture and enterprise. Is there any correction or validation?
Just very quickly, I didn't agree with the observation that it's not publishable research. I think that if you look at the OECD framework for the evaluation of SME and entrepreneurship policy, that's a publication with guidelines, and it's got 50 reliable evaluations in the document, and the majority of those are academic papers. A few of them are government evaluation reports, but most of them are academic papers. They're in Journal of Business Venturing, Small Business Economics, this sort of journal. So it's a misperception, I think, that you can't get academic papers out of policy evaluation.
That's the kind of pushback I want in this meeting.
Yeah,
That's
I think even
spot on.
if you look at the sort of top economics journals, right? Sabrina Howell published her look at the Small Business Innovation Research Program in the American Economic Review. We've seen any number of other evaluations of programs in top-tier journals. So I think it's more a matter of, as John was sort of indicating, sort of careful design and an interesting question than an allergy to doing these things per se. It may be different in strategy journals, but at least on the economic side, it seems there's a real appetite for it.
That's well said, Josh. Thank you. You know, one thing I wonder about, and I'm just curious, John, if you'd agree with this, is there is no analog to OECD in the United States, to my knowledge. I've been interacting lately with Milken, for instance, who pretended to do that work for a while. Kaufman has been involved in that work, but it's not been reliably there for long-term research opportunities. I don't mean to say anything casting aspersions on anyone, but you know, there's no consistency like OECD has produced. Is that a factor that we need to consider in building, at least in the United States, a better infrastructure to ensure that there are the collisions between the academics and the program managers, policymakers?
Yeah, I don't really know. I think that the US is less involved in the OECD than most of the OECD member countries, although it's the largest funder of the OECD individually, just above Japan. But in actual terms of studies done and participations in meetings, the involvement is surprisingly low. I've always put it down to, well, you're such a big country that you've got what you need. But you can always learn from others, can't you?
You've opened up a can of worms. I suggest we close right now for the time being.
And by the way, Chris Haley, I think, has a lot to say about this too, and you guys are being quiet. I'm so sorry that we have to move on, but we have to move on for all the right reasons. I would now like to change the aperture to the researchers, the people that are in the trenches doing this work every day. And we have an embarrassment of riches in terms of the thought leadership that's here among us. We've broken this into 3 different components, and they correlate to what GERN has been interested in over the last 15 years as we looked at this. The 3 areas are economic development, and we've added ecosystems. Sorry, we didn't make that its own. We should have done that. The second area is in the area of economics and finance, and I think we will be schooled by David and Josh in that area. And then the third is an exciting component on entrepreneurial development, talent development, and entrepreneurship education, which a lot of us are engaged in. How do we translate the practice of entrepreneurship into the real world? So I've asked each of our panelists to give 5 minutes on their view of, you know, what the building blocks are of their work, and then where would they like their work and the work of their colleagues who are more junior to go. And we started with Eric Stam. John already cited Eric's work as a best practice. You're already engaged in the practitioner community, and that's something I admire a great deal. But I'll turn it over to you, Eric.
Yeah, first of all, it's great to be here. Doing entrepreneur ecosystem research is a bit of a long-term commitment, so I think I've known John almost longer than my wife, so in that sense, what does that say? And also having Adanike here, which brought me to Nigeria, bringing to inspiring entrepreneurs like Mariam Lawani, being one of the most effective recycling entrepreneurs in Nigeria, having Chad here, which I've been talking to online a lot of times, and now finally on site, and many others. So it's really great to see this community here. Dan opening up my eyes more than a decade ago on this. But well, I'm normally quite constructive, so let's not do that today. I'm being a bit contrarian. I think we should be careful or aware that entrepreneur ecosystems has very much been a fad and a fashion and a buzzword, and there's a lot of scholarly bullshit on this. And I don't think we really want that for the future, because I think we're all here to improve the economy, society in one way or the other, and not to write policy reports or academic papers about something that is in fashion. So, having said that, I think most of you have joined the Entrepreneur Ecosystem Program, which I would call improving a data and dialogue approach to ecosystem development. And why data and dialogue? First of all, I think it was nice also having Chad's presentation this morning on entrepreneur ecosystem as placemaking. I think we should, and also having this discussion about talking about entrepreneurs. By the way, I don't think we should talk to one entrepreneur and satisfy that one entrepreneur. I think we are here to stimulate, enable groups of entrepreneurs. So my colleague Alex Coat said, I think this nicely, we shouldn't do what an entrepreneur wants, but what entrepreneurs need. So in that sense, really talking to bigger groups. But getting back to Chad. So I think ultimately we want and that's a bit contrarian. I think we don't want more entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is a bit of a garbage can category, from self-employed to unicorns, from tech entrepreneurs to mainstream, main street entrepreneurs, and that's not really helping us. So I think we should take a step back and think, well, why are we doing this? So I think we're doing this to create a better world tomorrow or later on. What does that mean? I think you can, at least from an academic point of view, give two answers here. You can, I think very much what Josh has been doing, a bit the Schumpeterian question. So how do we create better technologies, better options for tomorrow and increase structural change? I think that has been quite an important agenda, and entrepreneurs can play an important role in particular types of entrepreneurs, not all entrepreneurs, so we should make explicit what type of entrepreneurs. But I think my first call to action is to go beyond that. Structural change is extremely important. It helps to lift a lot of people out of poverty, increase productivity, incomes, jobs. But I think ultimately science is about enabling people to live a better life, a life that they have reason to value. You might say, well, this is a bit Humpty Dumpty, softy reasoning. But well, Amartya Sen won the Nobel Prize with this, I think, 10 or 15 years ago with his capabilities approach. So very much going back to Aristotle. But I think ultimately we are here to provide better lives to people. And that's not by coincidence also the motto of the OECD, so we're getting close to home. But I think better measuring this and being aware of what types of entrepreneurship leads to what type of outcomes, and I think that also brings evaluation research into the picture, is something we should really be much more serious about and also take much more heed of. And that's also bringing it back to Adenike, so talking to an entrepreneur and getting a feel of how she not only builds a business, how she adopts new technologies, but also how she enriches communities in Nigeria, I think is something that's both inspiring, but also very much needed to measure, to show that we're not doing bullshit research or following fads and fashions, but we are really experimenting to make improvements. So, focusing on outcomes, not just on entrepreneurship. Second, more and better data. Well, that's what you would expect, of course, of me, but I think having better data on the conditions of entrepreneurship, on culture, on networks, on leadership, I think we're far from there that we have a sufficient. I always say to my students, this is not rocket science, and perhaps we should not aspire to be rocket science, but being more than poetry, I think, is something that we should aspire to. And especially if we all think that culture, networks, leadership is very important, we should really push to get better data on this. Also, on the other hand, if we talk about well-being, human flourishing, I think there's now much more data on health, on energy, on equality, etc., than 10, 20, 30 years ago. So it's also a bit noblesse oblige. I think we can do much better. And to be a bit more contrarian even here, so I had a discussion with some colleagues at the World Bank who were now seeing that there's a decreased attention and use of good data in many democratic societies because governments are not willing to invest in data, not even use data anymore for their policies. So I think we also as academics have a bit of a role to push this data agenda. And perhaps to be optimistic, I think we're also living in the age of big data, and there's a lot of user-generated data, so we were a bit complaining that we should not bother all these entrepreneurs with getting more data from them, but they are giving a lot of data via Twitter, via Instagram, via their mobile money, via podcasts, via YouTube movies. So one of the most exciting, at least academically, things that I've been doing in the last year is teaming up with computer scientists in Kigali to measure successful entrepreneurship with analyzing YouTube movies and podcasts in Africa. Wow, that was really also, I'm learning a lot, not only culturally, but also so sometimes you have data sparse environment that can really accelerate the way we treat and use data. So user-generated data, I'm not going to say it's easy, and there's also all kind of privacy issues, but that I think is really a way forward, not to bother all the respondents and citizens in the world, but also to use the data that they provide. And be aware of the bias, of course. So first, be more aware of the outcomes. Second, better data, more data, perhaps a bit against the grain, but also using more new data analysis. And of course, we talk about AI all the time, but also let's make it work and use it for our own practices. And then I think better outcomes, better data, I would also say, and I think that is sort of preaching to the converted here, more engagement with practitioners. And that's why we call it a data and dialogue-driven entrepreneurial ecosystem approach. And I think especially the entrepreneur ecosystem approach only works when we have dialogues, because this is not rocket science, because then we could have all the data and could go to optimal policy decisions, and then we could get to Valhalla within 990 years, 0.99 seconds or something like that. And that's of course not, we're talking about social systems, about the live world. So if you give the Bible to an ape, he will not make sense of it. So we really have to make sense of all the data that we collect. And we also, a bit in line with going back to Hayek, we also need to get the local knowledge that's not yet in the data. So going to this entrepreneur that Adenike referred me to gives also a context sensitivity of what is needed, what works, beyond and interpreting the data that we get from all kind of other sources. So participating, having dialogues to really make sense of how to improve places, regions, countries with data, but making more informed decisions based on data. And these dialogues is extremely important. It's also somewhat difficult. You need to learn other languages, but I would also say it's also very much inspiring and a lot of fun stuff to do. But that also puts a bit more on the plate of academics, so you can't just be in your ivory tower, so you have to get out of it sometimes, but I think that's also inspiring, especially if you want to be this for a long run. And also, I think once we got the data, we have the dialogues, action needs to be taken. I think that's the most, of course, interesting thing, because where the action is, there's the learning and there's the improvement. And I think most academics are sort of lost because they just want to write their papers and want to collect the data and are not really involved in the long-term implementation. And I'm also going to echo the words of John here, and also the work by Adenike. Adenike has been doing this for 2.5 decades. So then you really learn what these interventions do, and we also learn that most of the interventions do not fully reach what we aspire, but by realizing this, by having data on this, by having monitoring and evaluation and learning, we really learn what is happening, why it's happening, is it not happening, and that inspires a lot of academic research as well that is relevant and it's not just bullshit scholarly research. So, bringing the circle fully back, taking a step back, what is the outcomes that we want to aspire? Having better data on both outcomes, conditions, types of entrepreneurship, also making use of the new techniques, fads and fashion that are out there, but make them useful. Engaging in dialogue with stakeholders on the ground, and then learning from them what they are doing, using their actions to reflect upon, to measure, to learn with data again, and then learn how this leads to better outcomes for the world.
Holy moly. Thank you. Isn't this fun? This is really fun. That you brought it, and I got to tell you, I have the hardest job because I'm AI transcribing this event, and then we're going to conspire to have a paper written out of this event. And Eric, we're going to be coming back to you because you've got a nested set of arguments that are really, really important that we get. And thank you for that contribution. Any commentary before we move on? Oh, please. A handheld microphone somewhere?
Matt has gone.
Yeah, come on up. Just press the red button.
Yes, that's it. Hi, Anita Shankar. I'm with Johns Hopkins University, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm coming from health. And so all of the things you said, Eric.
From Johns Hopkins.
Johns Hopkins University.
Yeah, I've heard about it. It's a good place.
Bloomberg School of Public Health. So anyway,
not bad.
I wanted to just reemphasize some of the things that Eric had said, because a lot of what we're learning from the health perspective is what you all are doing in entrepreneurship and the mindset that's required to be able to innovate, to take risks, are the basis of human thriving and flourishing, and ability to be resilient to stressors. And so actually, because what we do is we do personal agency training to help catalyze greater growth, either for entrepreneurs, but generally in the health sector. And what we find, if you give people more agency, they start businesses. So, but there's not enough crosstalk between the business folks, the entrepreneur folks, and the health folks. And in fact, there needs to be more of it. And I think we are at a point in time in history on the planet where entrepreneurial skills need to be reinforced, but made more generalizable, because not everybody sees themselves as an entrepreneur. So as you think about research, kind of how can you take this beyond just contributing within economics, but contributing to psychology, sociology, social networks. One other point regarding the qualitative research, I'm a medical anthropologist, and recognize the importance of qualitative research, but it takes so long to translate it into insights, but there are much faster ways to be able to do it. There's also ways that you can collect data and actually have the entrepreneurs get a little bit of money for answering surveys, which we can, because we need more data and we need to be able to process it fast, either through A/B testing, but we need to be able to use the insights right away because things are changing so quickly.
You know, I think we have a lot to learn from the clinical model in healthcare, and you see it as obvious, right? I mean, this is what you do. So you're like, why aren't you already doing it? I don't understand, right? Am I putting words in your mouth?
Well, you know, we can all learn from each other.
Yeah, no doubt. The other thing that both of you mentioned, both Eric and your name is, sorry?
Anita Shankar.
Anita, thank you for joining us.
Amelia, look at connected. We've been connected before.
So you both mentioned the Flourishing Study. And if you don't know, I was fortunate to be at the launch of the Flourishing Study. Gallup and Baylor and Harvard are working together on it. And one thing that was underplayed that I thought was an amazing opportunity for entrepreneurship researchers is looking at economic sustainability as a factor. It's one of the 5 factors they use to understand human flourishing. And that's kind of your point, right, Eric? We need entrepreneurship researchers to be looking at this question.
Yeah, so I've also been hanging out with people in the public health domain, so that's really nice because there's so much more, I think, also enabling of agency and thinking about what works and what doesn't work, which is very close to what we are doing here. And I think we ultimately would like to be interested in sort of virtuous cycles. So how can particular socio-economic conditions enable agency, entrepreneurship, innovation, whatever you want to call it, and how does that lead to particular aggregate outcomes on health, energy, etc., and how does this feed back positively again in the conditions? I think these are sort of the sweet spots that we'd like to show how that works and also have places in which this works. And we need to learn other languages as well. But I think there has been a lot of attention for development traps, which is the alternative. So how corruption leads to devastating types of entrepreneurship, which my colleague Samixa Desai knows a lot about, and I think we also need to know about that, but we need to know both about the virtuous and the vicious cycles. And I think teaming up with public health people is very important because there's so much connections and enablement in knowing more about that.
I'd also call the fact that you called yourself an anthropologist, which is another interesting frame of the work that we do. So thank you very much. I'm sorry, for sake of time, I want to just call on 2 folks for quick comments, Jerry and then Chad, and then we'll move on to the next scholar.
Thank you very much. So I'm Jerry Allen. I'm Director for Entrepreneurship, University College London. It's a delight to observe you in the room. And I'd like to pick up on something Norris mentioned earlier, because he talked about the sort of the gap between who these people are, between researchers and practitioners. I think the term is, I'm called a boundary spanner. And I think they're the people that are missing from the room. Right. Because you've got people who are academics and doing research there. I did come from that camp originally, but now I create startups. And I'm very fortunate in my role at UCL to be creating, we created 100 startups last year. I create lots of data. I'd love to share that data with the research community. And there's an open invitation there. So I think, actually, if you brought more people like me into the space, you'd have more opportunities for capturing research to be able to steer that longitudinal data. So I'm a boundary spanner. Great to hear about being provocative and sort of breaking into different markets. And delighted to work with any colleagues in the room that would like to reach out. Thank you.
See, I think you're our first clinical entrepreneurship professor or actor. Chad.
Excellent. Thanks, Ted. And thanks for the comment, Eric. And as I said this morning, in a lot of the work I do, I always have in the back of my mind, what would Eric be thinking, and what's Eric's thoughts on this? Long-term, well, not exactly long-term, but ecosystem researcher and focusing on that. One of the challenges I've had with entrepreneur ecosystems as a construct, as a concept, as I'm working in particularly regional communities, is it feels like it's a stretch to serve certain aspects of the community. And we put a prepend on the concept of entrepreneur ecosystems in order to support that. Inclusive entrepreneur ecosystems, women entrepreneur ecosystems, indigenous entrepreneur ecosystems. And when I go into regions, quite often they look at me and they say, well, what are you to me? And I'm trying to use entrepreneurship as a solution for a lot of the challenges. When a lot of things organizations that contribute to entrepreneurship, like say childcare centers or addressing domestic violence or early childhood development or addressing embedded poverty. Yes, entrepreneurship is a solution, but there's a lot of other conversations, housing and infrastructure, that need to happen quite often before that for certain communities. And so what we're finding is actually a change in the narrative to place. And so when we talk placemaking and place-based development, innovation entrepreneurship fits absolutely within that. But it's also a lot easier to get the funding, particularly from the major foundations who want to transform place, of which we then use innovation and entrepreneurship. Within Australia, we recently had the formation of a thing called PLACE. I don't exactly know what it is. It's an acronym as far as the actual definition, but it's a configuration of major philanthropic foundations and federal government with a vision for 15 regions. Innovation entrepreneurship will absolutely be part of that conversation, but it starts with this construct of place. And so as we think about the maturity and the evolution and longitudinal analysis on ecosystems, both from a physical ecosystem as well as the ecosystem construct, I'd be really curious in understanding, and it's part of the work that we're doing in Australia, is watching maybe that ebb and tide, and maybe the concept of ecosystem itself needs to change in order to accommodate more, because it feels like we're trying to stretch the term maybe to a breaking point. Maybe we need to start with a new base foundation of which innovation ecosystems, entrepreneur ecosystem, startup ecosystem sits on it, so we can actually start with a base of looking after everyone rather than going with a premise of entrepreneurship as the first point.
Thank you, Chad. That's great. I want to just take a moment. We're roughly 40% of the way through the agenda at the 50% point in our time. I just want to check in with everyone. Is this meeting working? Are you enjoying this meeting? Are you getting something from this meeting? That's where I want you to be. This is exactly where I wanted to be at this point. Everyone is participating. Everyone's communicating. We're learning from each other. We have authorities. We also have people who are really here to emulate and learn. Okay, so good. I'm going to challenge my esteemed colleagues to look at their notes right now and think about how you could communicate the same message in as tight a time frame as possible so we can keep the conversation going. Okay? Now, another authority in this area is Sammy Desai, and I've worked with Sammy for years. She's committed to translational research. So, Sammy from Indiana.
Thanks, Ted, and it's really, really great to have this in our backyard. Really nice to have it in Indiana, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I just want to sort of first situate my interest in ecosystems, and that is that I grew up in a country with martial law and watched a lot of the very things that academic knowledge and, you know, American academics as well would sort of hail as the solution to problems of poverty and political entrenchment, and that's how I came to this, because I felt very much like what Amelia said, which is that a lot of the frameworks and the theories didn't work for the types of places that I was seeing, and unfortunately, I think that is still a constraint. I still think that that is a problem, and I started working on this in 2008, so it's unfortunate, but that is still what I see. And so, you know, the point I really want to make is that when we think about entrepreneurship ecosystems and innovation ecosystems as well, we tend to get lost in the firms and in performance, and we tend to forget about people. And the critical mistake with doing that is in places that in particular are sort of politically and economically entrenched, or that are recovering from conflict and terrorism, having more firms isn't a reflection of economic advancement. Sometimes it's just a reflection of the two families that have access to all the resources, opening more companies and controlling more assets, right? I mean, I have seen that. I think many people in this room have seen that and lived through that. And so fundamentally, I think we want to remain focused on people and not get lost in firm performance. And then related to that, which, you know, Eric articulated very nicely, is we really need to think about outcomes. So does entrepreneurship actually improve social welfare? I don't want to be a contrarian, but unfortunately I just am. And I think that that means, and this is my first point, that we need to rethink success. And more is not better, right? I mean, look, if everyone starts a business, who's going to work in them? They're not going to grow. So more is not better, but also sometimes it is not in a person's best interest to start a business. So I was speaking with a women's business development center, and one of the things that they said was, we have donors who really want to see our numbers go up. But we also often get women coming in that say, my schedule won't allow this, I've got these responsibilities, I've got to do something, and so I feel like I should start a business, right? And in many of those cases, it's not actually the best outcome for that woman or for us from a social perspective, right? The second thing that I sort of use as an example is the immigration story. So we know from a lot of sociology-style research that many immigrants, not all, some certainly see a big opportunity, but many immigrants are shut out of the labor market, and that's why they start a business. Now, just one piece of anecdotal evidence, if you are a pediatric nurse from another country, but your barrier to working as a nurse is credentialing, are you better off starting a cleaning business? In some worlds, we would say yes, that's a new business, right? Are we all better off if you did that versus working as a nurse? Probably not. And in this case, the business in particular I'm talking about is a cleaning, it's anecdotal evidence. But so I think we have to rethink success. And that means that as researchers, we have some responsibility to be contrarian, right? And to really push back hard on this idea that more is better, particularly when we're engaging with donors and ecosystem builders and the people that control the money, right? Policymakers as well. So I think that's my first sort of, I'll be contrarian. He's set the stage. So the second thing is, when we think about the idea of who doesn't start a business, our existing data frameworks are largely inadequate. So when we think about firm-level outcomes, or we might look at employee-employer databases, we are only looking at people that have already started a business, or we're looking at entities. Then when we look at individuals and we think about this idea of nascency, so someone who's in the process of starting a business, that's very valuable. But what we really very rarely look at is people who have started and then dropped off the path. Right? And I would argue that when we think about, all right, this question of targeting and selection that Jonathan mentioned, when we think about that question, what we really need to know so that we can serve these, small business development centers, innovation support programs, extension partnerships, the question we really need to be able to answer for them is, who is interested in starting a business, potentially taken some steps, but encountered some barriers that just took them off the path, right? And we really rarely see those people in the data. And partly it's very expensive to find those people because you need a population-based approach. When I was at Kauffman, we piloted something. It now is a much larger project called the Entrepreneurship in the Population, EPOP for short, project. But it is expensive and it takes a long time, and you have to have a huge swath of people to be able to parse out where people are on the entrepreneurship journey, right? So from a policy and particularly a funder perspective, I think that's an important question that's overlooked quite a bit. And I think that lines up quite well with targeting and selection. The other sort of piece that I think is really important, and I agree with Jonathan, evaluations are publishable, and that should actually increase in the future. But the other point about that is that as we rethink success and as we sort of really kind of maintain a focus on people, that pushes us also to think more creatively about what success means. So I would love to see an ESO be able to report to its donors that X% of people came in and then decided not to start a business after they engaged with their program, right? And that would itself be considered a measure of success rather than just churning out more people and checking boxes. I don't think we're there, but I think that would be a really great way to think about it. And that, of course, means qualitative research, which several folks have talked about. And then the last point that I'll make is that research and practice, obviously, we're all researchers, and we know that there is a gap. We have a gap both in translation, and I think we have this, our health sciences colleague, I think there's a lot we can learn from especially clinical health research, but we also have a gap the other way around. And policymakers are telling us what they need. And frankly, I think we as researchers, I am in a policy school, I'm not in a business school, I'm not in an economics department, and I think, you know, in policy schools too, where we are sort of supposed to be more responsive to policy, we still have a fundamental problem, which is we ignore what policymakers tell us. Every federal agency, every state agency has a list of its priorities, right? Why doesn't that motivate our research more effectively? And so I think one of the things that we can do too is be much more responsive to what policymakers and donors are actually telling us they need, right? And not letting data limitations stand in our way. And then the last thing that I'll say is, you know, translation is about a picture, and research, unfortunately, is about just a part of that picture, and I think that is what makes it so fundamentally difficult. One report that we wrote at Kauffman probably has had more impact on policy than my 4 top journal papers combined. And it was sort of marginally peer-reviewed. I mean, I think we got some feedback on it. But I think we are missing a real opportunity from a translation perspective, and that is, at least for those of us that are in universities and that are professors, our students offer a tremendous amount of opportunity. When I look at our master's students, particularly in public policy, economics, MBA students, law students, they understand what it is we do, and they also, many of them, don't have aspirations to do peer research. And so for me, that has always been a really nice model to sort of train them to actually, you know, process what policy folks need, figure out what we can do for them, tell the story, not about just one mentoring study that looked at, you know, how many interactions do you need to be effective, but tell the story of 5 or 6 that give you a much better practitioner picture. So the only sort of call I would make is, you know, we need to be much more cognizant and humble about motivating our work by what policymakers and entrepreneurship supporters and even donors are asking for.
Wow, please. Marissa, and you have another comment back here, and we'll need the microphone. You know, I'm starting to see a pattern, which the clinical model that we talked about is got to be emphasized now, with even, based on Sammy's point of view, more of a policy demand effect. All right, so Marissa.
Hi, I'm Marissa Kaloga from University of Auckland in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Really enjoying the conversation, and Sammy, you brought up the idea of social welfare as being a really important part of social work, or of entrepreneurship, and I came to being an entrepreneurship scholar through being a community level social worker. So looking at really starting my career working with the most marginalized among entrepreneurs and looking and saying what is necessary to bring folks to the place where whatever they're trying to do, the barriers are to as much of a degree as possible removed, and folks can get on with the business of building a life for themselves. I've done quite a bit of work with resettled refugee entrepreneurs, both in the US through ECDI in Ohio, as well as with the Itireria Collective in New Zealand. And to your point, I think that is a population of entrepreneurs with which you can look at different definitions of success. So for some of I was an embedded researcher with Itireria Collective, so was doing evaluation and research together, co-funded by Foundation North. And so that's kind of that evaluation model where you can see it going directly into research. And we measured self-efficacy, we measured overall well-being, and we measured resilience alongside the different types of firms and job creation that was happening. So I think there are ways that you can embed those types of measurements and to be able to report back both to the economic development aspect, but in this instance into the refugee well-being and integration aspect of being involved in the programs, because there are, for ESOs, tremendous amounts of other benefits besides firm creation that can be measured and can be communicated and lead to additional knowledge and insight. Thanks.
It goes back to what Eric was saying in terms of human flourishing, understanding the conditions on the ground, and your call, Sammy, is, you know, look at marginalized communities as well, and look at situations where starting a business doesn't make sense, or there might be conditions where it's not appropriate to start a business, and there are certain circumstances, certainly. Another comment back here.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm actually a restaurant teacher. So I'm actually endowed by a gentleman who owns Panda Express. So I'm teaching at two schools, Las Vegas, UNLV, also Cal Poly Pomona. So I'm here to talk about people. Yeah, and I also teach entrepreneurship in Cal Poly Pomona. I was very surprised when I put a class and 32 students, 10 group, 6 group in restaurants. Everybody talk about the food. I have a lot of Indian students, they want to do Indian Express. I have a lot of Latinos, they want to do taco shops. So that's the entrepreneurship. But I feel it's more like a tech entrepreneurship. So when you talk about people and Chad talk about placemaking as a entrepreneurship as a solution to our human society, I feel this is something I love to be. I love to share this. This is very, very important because people, particularly in the restaurant business, 10% of workforce, they only produce 3% GDP. A lot of people in the food, a lot of people in the housing, transportation, retailing. Their GDP is very low, but I think there's more opportunity from there. So that's why I want to echo Sammy also chat. And then I really want to see more students are encouraged to observing. They can use tech solution to help our society make better. That's my only one I want to share. Thank you so much.
I don't want to scare people, but in the short term, AI job displacement will actually force us to be looking at lifestyle matters. You know, how do people make a living? And this is going to be an urgent call to action very soon. I could go on, but I'm not. All right, so rounding out our thought leaders, Dan Eisenberg, who is one of our foremost leaders in ecosystems.
Thank you very much. Time is short. I'll be brief, or to the point, rather. And luckily, Eric and Sammy made my life a little bit easier, so I'm going to change my comments to some extent. So I'll start off giving just a little bit of personal context, because I think people know one aspect, but there are other aspects of my background that frame my comments. Second, I will propose a way forward to solve the problem that Eric and Sammy and others have raised. And then thirdly, if there's time left, I'll complain. So I've done
Why don't we start with the third first? No, I'm just kidding.
No. I was going to. I made my 107th investment in a startup last week. I'm now contemplating my 8th and 9th. I have 8 funds that I'm an LP in. I'm founded and ran a company in Israel for 15 years, founded a venture capital fund there. I'm telling you the things that you don't know. And of course, I created a course called International Entrepreneurship at the Harvard Business School, and published at least 40 HBS cases, which I recommend as a sort of kind of a type of research, because it gets you mucking around, as Nora said. It gets you deep into the material. Anyway, that's enough of that. But so I'm speaking sort of about the 360 degrees of entrepreneurship, I think, by now. I look on the screen at myself and I realize that I'm probably old enough to have done all those things. What I'm going to propose, and this is in the context of entrepreneurship ecosystems, which is not the same as entrepreneurship, and a lot of what we talked about assumes utility, not just curiosity or understanding, but utility. So, given that assumption, I'm going to propose the utility that we're talking about, and listen to me, please, very carefully. In 9 words: more and more local firms growing more and more rapidly. Full stop. I'll say it again. More and more local firms growing more and more rapidly. I didn't use the word entrepreneurship. It's hard to spell, it's hard to say. And even John, he's not here right now, he used the word growth as often as he used the word entrepreneurship. I was counting. So it's hard to spell and it's confusing, let's use the one that's simple. And I think we can almost do away with the word entrepreneurship as an outcome variable, as a utility variable. And the purpose, what I call the scale-up purpose, more and more local firms growing more and more rapidly, I think is a phenomenally interesting and useful way of thinking about why we're doing what we're doing. It ticks a lot of boxes. It's intrinsically measurable. number one. It's intrinsically about ecosystem and not about individual actors. More and more local firms growing more and more rapidly. It's intrinsically a dynamic and not a static. So it's more and then more and more and more. There are issues, there are challenges in that. There are limits to more and more, et cetera. But I think it's a useful heuristic. And we've been using it in our actual intervention work for the last 7 or 8 years. It took me the first 10 years of doing intervention work to come up with that. Number two is as a way forward. I may already be shocking some people, but as a way forward, I think this allows the development of a common metric, which I'd like to propose here, that I think addresses also ticks a lot of the box and intrinsically doable, not easy, but doable. And that is, I call it the skinny. It's kind of a joke, but the Gini, which is a measure of inequality. And it's very interesting because it says that two different regions that have the same average wealth or income can be very different because of the way it's distributed. That's true also about entrepreneurship. A region that has one firm growing very rapidly and everyone else static is very different from where that growth is broadly based. This I've actually developed. I tried to convince Eric 7 years ago to take this seriously. He hasn't yet, but he's still young, so there's time. But I think that this could be extraordinary. It's doable in principle. It's not easy because the data are difficult to get, but they're there. And I think this could be an incredibly powerful, unifying way of measuring. If you want to change something, you have to measure it. So again, I think there's I've made a mock database, tested it out. It's conceptually simple. It'll take some work by really trained economists to make it a reality, but it's not impossible. So that's the way forward. With the remaining minute or two, let me complain a little bit. This just to make at least me feel good, and maybe Ted. The problem number one, we've done a really good job with the independent variables. Eric's research is beautiful. Take a look at it if you haven't. Slog your way through it. So I think we nailed sort of the construct validity side of things. We've done a really, really horrible job, if at all, on the dependent variables. We've been relying on bad databases such as Crunchbase Inc., the Financial Times Fast, whatever they call it in Africa, JEDI, GEM, Startup, and so on and so forth. They're all really, really bad databases. And if you don't have good data, I probably wouldn't bring that up, except I think there are some good databases out there. If you look at what ERC, Mark Hart and others have done with their database, it's phenomenal. In the biological sciences, you choose a model organism and study the hell out of it. You choose a model organism that allows you to get real insight into what's going on. The giant squid axon's a great example. Many thousands of papers and several Nobel Prizes won on it. And then later on, you start asking, because you can actually study what you're looking at. And I think with that database of growth, you can actually study what we're looking at more. And do firms grow? Under what conditions do they grow? How much do they grow? And where do they grow? You can actually see that happening with that database. So stop what you're doing. If you're doing research, stop what you're doing and get over to the database and use that to answer the questions reliably. The problem with, I'll just give you a couple of anecdotes, and sorry, Eric, you do such good research that it allows you to raise good questions. But in one of the papers, you find out that Mauritius is number one in entrepreneurship in Africa, but everyone knows that that's like saying Delaware is number one in entrepreneurship in the United States. Or conversation I had 15 years ago with Zoltan Axe, and Puerto Rico in the first versions of JEDI was several stages above Israel in entrepreneurship. I know I was doing a project there. Yeah, I know it really well. It just doesn't. Sorry, it doesn't work. It's not measuring what we think. And he had a very, very complex explanation, which did not include the fact that the JEDI isn't measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. So that's on the dependent variable side, and and on the moderating variable side of how do ecosystems actually produce those outputs. Ben Spiegel just wrote, hasn't published yet. I read all these papers in preparation. I hate you, Eric. I told you that already. I had to read his paper twice to understand it, one of his papers. But Ben has just is publishing a set of interviews that he did with growth entrepreneurs in Scotland, and he actually gets real insights because he's asking the question, how do these characteristics of an ecosystem actually generate these outputs? What are the moderating variables that lead to those outcomes? And I think we need a lot more of that. I've finished complaining. I have more complaints if there's time available, but I feel much better. Thank you.
I love it. I love it. Let's give it a round. Yeah, you did. The best compliment I make is your mensch. That's all I have to say.
But pay attention to the middle part of it, please. I think there's some interesting and important ideas there. That's it.
No question. That's excellent. And it actually tees up the next group really well. And I'd like to just do the preamble. David and Josh are two people I truly admire because they've moved the needle. They were pioneers, I would argue, in ushering in our understanding of the private markets by using good data. And I think would complain like ultimately Josh would on the availability of good data. But now with the advent of CB Insights and PitchBook and Privco and Capital IQ and some of the private databases, things are actually starting to become researchable. We wanted to turn to economics and finance. And if there was a functional equivalent to OECD in the United States, the closest we get is NBER. And they're not really the same in a lot of ways. But at the same time, NBER has done a lot of great work to bring the economists together. David, could you open up in your thinking about the futures? Because you're kind of I have to confess, if I was a fanboy, I'd be your biggest fanboy. I love your research. Your research is some of the most inspiring research I've ever seen. And, he actually knows math, which is impressive. So, there you go.
First of all, thank you, Ted, for convening this great forum. I'm really enjoying the comments here. The academic field of entrepreneurship is actually not that old. And I think it's done a really good job on a few questions that by now I feel like we've got a good handle on. Questions around the founding decision, as well as some of the kind of financing and funding decisions. I want to make just a few simple points that I feel like we're at the life stage of this discipline to move further. And when I say move further, I have it in service of being evidence-based, in the sense that I would feel good about teaching to my students at Wharton based on the research. And so that's the kind of mindset that I'm kind of approaching this. And so recently I've been thinking about the following topics as possible candidate areas to focus on, with the eye of having new data, new sources, revitalized kind of researchers in the domain. One would be in the domain of startup labor markets. I think that relative to financing, we understand less about talent, compensation, motivation. And so when we think about those topics, we often think about areas of the world in which we can gather such data very systematically, places like Scandinavia. Now, those are very small countries. It's not clear that they're representative of other regions of the world. So one solution to that, and that's one area that I'm going to propose a network like this one could be really quite good at, is to think ambitiously about data resources, maybe have partnerships with big data providers that could really allow researchers in the network to get some leverage, get some data assets, maybe establish some collaborations. Because I really want to underscore this point that was made earlier, which is that in order to really get a lot of bang for your buck, you really need orchestration. I think about this in the context of, and let me just share very quickly a personal anecdote. When my son, who was then 3, was diagnosed with leukemia, this deadly cancer, it's a fairly rare cancer, but what really made a lot of progress in the field is orchestration among academic institutions. They shared protocols, they shared interventions, and I think cumulatively, they're able to make progress on a very difficult, intractable disease. And I'm glad to say that my son is a survivor, probably as a result of that orchestration. So as I think about the field of entrepreneurship, I kind of feel like we're at this juncture where we could strive to be more salient, dream bigger in terms of our data partnerships and collaborations. I think that we can move beyond, and by the way, I'm guilty of also using Scandinavian data because it's so rich, and but I feel like we can make more generalizable headwinds in a bunch of different domains. The other area that I'm personally interested in, that I'm doing work on actively, is in the domain of university technology, transfer, commercialization, and in particular from the demand side of the market, not just from the supply side. And so I feel like that's yet another area in which we could perhaps, I can access perhaps, my own University of Pennsylvania data, and it's an important university because it came up with innovations like mRNA, but if we could get a richer set of researchers, more collaborative data techniques that we could really stress test these things, I think we could make progress here. And so I don't want to kind of belabor these things. A lot of the themes I find myself agreeing with that many have said here, translation, data quality, new sources of data there. But I feel like this is the time to really dream bigger at this inflection point of the academic field. And so again, let me just stop there and turn it over to the real experts in the room here, Josh, on this topic.
Well, before we turn over to Josh, I just want to just take a moment to thank you for sharing the story about your son, and let's give you a round of applause for overcoming with your son such a challenge. We're thrilled that he's on the other side of that. Josh, I don't even know what to say. Josh has been a pioneer and a champion of entrepreneurship and all things in the finance and economics world. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, first, I'm going to have to say thank you for inviting me. Second, I'm going to say David said this morning he was going to use slides, so I desperately ginned up some slides, and then he defaulted on me. But having put the effort into them, I'm going to be damned if I'm not going to use them. And I guess third, I'll say that we teach a PhD class in entrepreneurship where we spend 40 hours and probably spend like at least 10 of those 40 hours talking about topics to do research on and where there's opportunities, because I think this is the land of opportunity. I'm not going to run through a 5-minute synopsis of 10 hours. I'm just going to talk about one topic. But I just chose one topic that I think is something where you can think about strategy people adding value, economists adding value, finance people adding value, where different kinds of methodologies can be there, and I think it's a big topic. So with that, and where I'm starting is with the quote here from Peter, right, of saying, what is it that entrepreneurs have produced? And I think we've heard a little bit of echoes of this in some of the earlier conversations, saying, well, there's certainly been a lot of wonderful things coming out of the high potential entrepreneurial ecosystem. It doesn't seem that everything that solves all our problems have been produced there, right? So this is something that my former beloved colleague, Raman Ananda, now off at Imperial, and I did a few years ago, where we looked at what are the kind of companies funded by venture capitalists over the decades, and it makes the point there's been a huge explosion in terms of funding of software companies, B2C, B2B, internet, AI, and the like. If you look at the companies doing the real stuff, whether we're thinking about hardware, advanced materials, tough techs, all those kinds of issues, there's clearly been much more of a stability in that. If we put this in dollars, it would probably be even more dramatic. Now, of course, that isn't crazy, the fact that the venture capitalists haven't funded that kind of stuff. It's called tough tech for a reason, because they haven't made a lot of money doing it. I think when it comes to clean tech, There was one calculation I showed that I saw where it said that if you had put $1 into every clean tech company that would have gotten venture funding, you would roughly in the last 40 years have gotten your money back. So high risk, no return. Clearly, venture dudes aren't stupid, and they have obviously migrated as a result in this way.
I can confirm that real quick, if you don't mind me sharing an attitude, Josh. I was on my way here and ran into one of the biggest VCs in clean tech, and I asked him how he was doing, and he says, all I'm doing now is trying to shore up the companies. There's going to be hundreds and hundreds of failures due to the changes of policy, and he's trying to do everything he can to keep the sector alive. Yeah. So it gives you an idea of the importance of the economic factors relative to the industry factors.
Now, you might say, this is entrepreneurship. Why worry about entrepreneurship? There's lots of money in other places. But we know there's also been changes, and one of the big ones has been corporate R&D funding. This is from some fascinating work by Ashish Arora, Sharon Bilanzan, and Leah Scher, where they sort of make the point that over time, corporations have moved away from basic kind of research funding, the Bill Labs and the IBM Central Research, and much more to applied stuff. Again, are the corporations stupid for doing this? No, we know that, this is a famous presidential address by Mike Jensen where he looked at any number of corporations and looked at the net present value of their R&D spending compared to their market cap and said all these guys like GM and IBM and Xerox are burning research money and basically getting nothing for it. When Mike did the compilation, the two winners he got were Intel and GE. I think if we were to revisit it today, given what's happened to their stock prices, we'd have across-the-board losers rather than that, right? So corporations aren't stupid, and they realize they're much better at applying stuff and doing the incremental stuff at the end rather than anything else. This is just work by one of the Harvard doctoral students, Namrat and Narain, where she showed that if you look at all the mix of technologies out there and look at what the gestation lag is, how long it takes to put into action, essentially the average is like 7 years on average. If you look at what corporates and VCs are doing, it's like 4 years. So basically the long run research isn't really being funded by those guys. Again, rationally, not because they're evil people, but because that's the way it is. So who's done it? Well, we know who's done it in the US. It's tended to be people with names like NIH, NSF, DOE. Well, we know the story there. That stuff is sort of really an endangered species right now. And I think, beyond, the sort of individual politics, I think when we think about federal government budgeting and stuff, it's natural to wonder how much of this stuff is going to be there going forward. So anyway, where does transformative research really originate? Is it changing? Is there a sort of substitute for public funding? How much does the financing sources really matter? What are the differences across technologies? And in particular, with an eye to globally, as we have here, particularly looking at China, how does one think about the things that are happening there and the implications? And with that, I will conclude. Thank you.
Holy moly, that was great. So some major seismic shifts going on in our economy, both influenced by the policy environment as well as the economic conditions and, the rational actor, the investor, and how they might place their capital for growth. What feedback would you like to have before we close this session on economics of finance? Please.
Just to comment, which is David, I completely agree with this need to, go other places than Scandinavia. I do think it's worth pointing out that, and so I only say this because I've done research in conflict zones and places like that, our journals are still not there. And so I think particularly for people who are on academic tracks, who are doing this kind of research, we also, if we're in a position, to sort of open up or put some pressure on our publication process and on our journals, we need to do that because we can't, we still do see a bias towards data from those systems. And I don't think that goes away naturally. And so that is for me also just sort of a counterpoint. I agree completely. I just also think there's still a lot of barriers for folks.
Please.
Sammy, do we need to educate the journals, the editors, and the reviewers? The AMLE, which is Learning and Education, they have people on their board who know nothing about education. Now, they're there for another reason, but it was sort of a jarring, kind of a jarring response. But it seemed like there's an opportunity. Is there some leverage if we can educate reviewers and editors, or is that misplaced?
That's an interesting model. How would you respond to that, Sammy? I've got a pretend answer.
Yeah, I think it's also what we value. So, for example, this focus on replicability, it is really important. But if you are walking around in a politically violent area and you're collecting data from individuals by hand and then you go back, it's going to be really hard to replicate. And if you spend a year of your life doing that and then you find out you can't publish in journals, which I think is the case for folks, then it makes the sort of value of your work, at least from a publication or a journal perspective, and then a career perspective, if you are, in a university, it really compromises that. And I think when I talk to assistant professors and postdocs and PhD students, they are often, and I got this advice too, but they're often thinking about where to publish something before they go and design what they're doing, right? Or before they figure out how to write up the paper, which I think is a really bad way for research to be done, right? But they know how the journal is going to treat something, or they have some expectation, and they go off and sort of figure out how to fit, rather than the way that it should be, which is, here's the really interesting work, right? So yeah, I mean, maybe there's a role. I don't know how that would work. But I do think certainly we see a bias, right, where papers that use data from countries that, aren't Scandinavia, or data that you collect by hand in particular.
Well, I'm elderly enough to remember that a panel of the editors of the top entrepreneurship journals, and they asked them, how many qualitative papers have you published? And they said none. How many good ones did you get? They said none. Which was probably not true. We've overcome some biases in the past, but I think the example you said of you're in the middle of a war zone, you're probably not going to. The replication is going to be really challenging, but it's also really important work. We have an anthropologist here still.
Well, no, exactly. I think that call to action was pretty clear, and I think that will come through in the white paper. One thing I would mention in my pseudo answer, Norris, is I would aspire for this group to play a role. If we could go through a couple iterations with some of the thoughtful people here, if we could put out at least white papers, if not manuscripts, on the findings of this kind of work. It's like a navigation path, and then get them to the editors. Or to the reviewers, so they would influence their optics and what they look for. The other thing that I wonder about is if we can start to really be intentional about teeing up practitioners. And I think the GEN team has specifically attempted to bring foundations to the table and larger funders, because we know that academics will fight for money. So we've only been marginally successful on that mission. But I think that's what we'd aspire to have.
Hey, Ted.
Please.
Just a thought on this. I think this room is unique in a lot of ways because there are practitioners here, and we've been talking a lot about how our research actually has meaning in the world and how we apply it. And I think that's the big disconnect for so many of the journals and how we're evaluated through our tenure processes. I mean, I've taken a very non-traditional path all the way, and it doesn't always, it doesn't always get you to the top of the mountain in terms of academics, but for a lot of people, including me, if I'm making a difference in the world, that's what really matters. But it doesn't always, I got tenure, but it doesn't always get you tenure, and that to me is part of the big issue, It's not just whether the journals are, I think the journals are a problem, but it's also what are our academic institutions counting as valuable research. And I did a lot of work with a group called COACH, and it was women scientists, engineers, chemists, and they were physicists, and they were, most of those women were not thinking about how to commercialize their research because that wasn't the path that they were accustomed to taking. More the men were doing it, but a lot of the women weren't. And consequently, a lot of their research was not being taken out off the bench. And that really had a big impact, on me in terms of thinking about all these highly accomplished women, in this case, that had a lot to offer to the world in terms of entrepreneurship. But, the system they were in wasn't rewarding that, so they weren't pursuing that. And they didn't really, there were a lot of other things. I mean, I think about entrepreneurial mindset as an enabler, which I'll talk about. But I think, I think it's a systemic problem with our research, quite honestly. And I think that's what's interesting to me about this room is that there are people here that are actually trying to take the work that we do and use it, and instead of just talking to each other about it because it's interesting.
No question. The qualitative work is an arena for theory building and for research questions that are really critical. And, just the interaction with practitioners is a great test bed. Rebecca, I want to, with the permission of Jeff and Don, go out of sequence and just have you keep flowing because we're going to be going to the group. I've got 2 quick points, though, back here and here. And then, but before we even give your points, I want to do something funny. It is 3:06. We have an hour left. I'm feeling like everyone is tired of sitting. So what I want to do is I want everyone to stand up, shake it off, right? I want you to stretch up as high as you can go. Stretch to the left, stretch to the right. Bend backwards. And then give a high five to somebody next to you. That feel better? Can we do another hour? This is going well, I think, right? Yeah, let's do. We have the energy. Hug it out. Okay. All right, let's keep going.
All right, Ted, I want to.
Yes, and then the comment
Ted.
up here.
Ted.
Please.
First, I'm going to talk about Puerto Rico. So we were the guinea pig of Daniel Eisenberg study in ecosystem, and it changed our path. So if you are a university, study your ecosystem. If you are a community, study your ecosystem. If you are interested in the blue economy, study the ecosystem. Involve the stakeholders. It's very important after the study has been done, the research. That's what Dan did in Puerto Rico. It got us involved in what was happening. And I know you love salsa, so we took you to dance with Jorge. The research that he did with Jorge Rodriguez, the study in Harvard cases, we used them. It got us all together, and at the end of the day, the orchestration was done because of our research. And in my case, I teach entrepreneurship in the University of Puerto Rico, and I do my class with Rebecca White research, and that's how I developed the course that I give there, trying to improve their what you call them, Rebecca, the competencies. So with those, with that in mind, research is very important for the teacher, for the professor, for the community, and for us being here and hearing everything that you have been saying. It's very important for us to get back with this information and transferring to the country that we are.
That's almost a perfect transition to our next section.
Hey, Ted, before,
Outstanding. Please.
Ted.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Good to
come
see you,
back
Jeff.
quickly on the previous topic of having great data and sharing data, and I wanted to offer that, we're happy to help. We have the best data in the world because we merged the 3 databases, and Crunchbase is full of data as they change their of errors. Deal Room is very imprecise, right? There's early stage funding, doesn't define seed versus Series A, PitchBook, blah, blah, blah. We're merging also Traxon. We have spent $500,000 a year on cleaning the data with AI, machine learning, manual search. And we have the global patent analysis categorized by tech sectors. We have all of the startups categorized by tech sectors. And we have 100,000 surveys that created data on local connectedness and all kind of questions that you wouldn't believe we ask, like even psychometrics that we tested on 10,000 founders. So we're happy. If you have a need for data, call us. Not sure we can always help, but we're happy to help. Sometimes it's going to take us an hour to give you the data that you're looking for, and it's going to be global data, standardized. So we're happy
Can I
to
ask a
do
question
that.
about that? It's data mostly focusing on capital raising.
Well, we have a lot of data on, of course, the funding databases and exits, but we have a lot of data on patents, on university strength, and on all kind of founder-created data. Like,
do you have data?
How many
revenues, profits?
We have some, but what we also have the possibility is to pull out the revenue data from our surveys, from Traxon, from PitchBook in one place, so we can help you, extrapolate, interpolate, et cetera, and employees as well.
Until proven otherwise, I'm happy to do that. I'll get into it offline. I've learned more about it, but I'm guessing that a lot of this is a proxy for venture-backed companies and venture capital activity. And if that's true, then we have to be really careful, because I think we're really, the study would be very, very highly correlated with the kinds of research that Josh and others are doing, which is basically on venture capital or venture capital related activities. And we know that that's a very, very small percentage of the entrepreneurial activity that exists in the world. I mean, horribly small, 1%, 0.5%, 2%, etc.
Exactly. That's why we spend like $500,000 4 times to do surveys to create all this missing data. Right? All the data on networks. Do people help each other? What's your DNA? What were your parents? Were they entrepreneurs? We have an enormous amount of data on like the psychometrics of a life sciences founder versus a software founders, all from primary research. And that's exactly because of that, right? A lot of data we have is funding and exits, which is related to VC funding. And so we created all of this other data.
I would credit JF personally for having been an actor that's brought data together in such a novel way, and a mechanism for us to engage with the practitioner community that's been high throughput, very highly effective. If I could do 2 things, it would be to duplicate the scholars that are in the room and triplicate the JF Gaultiers in the room. Because my sense is that we need more people that are doing curation like what you've done, and you've taken it upon yourself personally. It's just extraordinarily exciting.
We have a big team of 30 people, but we have like 5 data scientists in India working full-time all the time to do all kind of crazy analyses that we ask for.
Pretty outstanding. So please. All right.
Thank you to all the scholars. I'm Kim Betcher. To follow up on Professor Lerner's reframing, which I thought was really helpful, and I appreciated it. Yesterday, I was struck by Jonathan Ortman's opening statement about global disruption. He was talking about disruption to the global order, disruption of funding, even disruption of political orders. And I'm wondering if there's a moment, if this is a time when we could have more agile research, if we could find out this year what effects these disruptions are having on ecosystems, on partnerships. Does it matter? What remains? What is resilient, or what are the new pathways or responses? And I know this is kind of quick and dirty research maybe, but I think having, in this situation, an agile response this year would be more useful than looking at it next year? Thank you.
Now that's a call to action. And I agree, it's just like the life cycle of research. It's got to be responsive to the immediate need because there are changes to the world order. Thank you for that. Going back to the flow. The third phase, I've got to confess to you all, there are people that I truly admire in this category. You know, when I think of Kelly Shaver, who really was one of the pioneers of the merger of psychology and entrepreneurship. I think of Rebecca and all she's done in the areas of competencies and understanding entrepreneurial mindset. Jeff Hornsby, who's really unpacked entrepreneurial learning and entrepreneurial motivation, entrepreneurial orientation. Don, it just goes on. Don, you've been a champion in our field for years. And what's interesting is we're all in little camps, you know. We all know each other. David, Josh, a few of the finance, you all know each other. There's not a lot of crosstalk. You know, it's fascinating. So one thing I would love to learn from y'all is how we can actually be cross-disciplinary with our own discipline. But Rebecca, going back to your flow, could you pick up on your thoughts on when I use this rubric of entrepreneurial development and education? I'm really talking about entrepreneurial learning, entrepreneurial mindset, and all the human factors. In fact, who was it who mentioned the people? You know, bring the people into the equation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you, Ted, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here. It's been very interesting. And as I said earlier, I think what's unique about it is that we have so many different voices in the room, all focused, I think, on the common good. So I mentioned earlier, well, let me back up a little bit. I think I love the Agile comment. I love thinking about new types of research. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, and I appreciate the comments about using the model that I've worked on. And I love that David brought up the goal of more collaborative research. I know Ted and Don and Jeff and some of the others of you in this room might know that a few years ago, one of my visions was that we might come together and have a common language around what entrepreneurial mindset really means. And we convened maybe about 15 scholars at the University of Tampa and had a great day's discussion. But I think, like David said, there is a lot of opportunity there. And I think this is a great start. I've probably taken one of the more non-traditional pathways when it comes to research. I was trained in classic PhD. I have a PhD in strategy, in methodology, but I have really approached my work, I think, from the perspective of curiosity and really just answering questions that I saw out there that I thought needed to be answered and trying to figure out how to translate that. And what that really brought me to, because I've been a teacher all the way through, I've been in the classroom, was trying to really understand what we as entrepreneurship educators should be teaching. What does it look like for some, I mean, what should someone who graduates with entrepreneurship degree or entrepreneurship training, what should they be able to do? I didn't feel like we had a real agreement on that. So I went to one of my colleagues from the education field and I said, I don't know about this education thing. I'm an educator, but I was trained in business. And so he brought me to the world of competencies. It was already brought up. And so I started looking at the competencies of an entrepreneurial mindset. Again, tried to go down a more traditional academic path, I think, of doing that research, but got a little frustrated with it and decided to go to a more popular press focus. I took the research that had been conducted by my scholarly friends, by the research that I had done myself, collaborated some with some of my other colleagues, and developed what I thought was a really, really simple model that could be shared. And so that model, again, thinking about entrepreneurial mindset as an enabler, I think has a lot of application. And it deals in three primary areas. One is seeing opportunities. That's one of the things that we have found that entrepreneurs do differently and that we can understand. I loved the comments about entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurship and well-being. Because the ability to see opportunities and the ability to create value, I think, is critically important. And I think now with AI, I'm very fascinated by how AI can be used in the classroom, but also how AI can be used by entrepreneurs. And all of us, I'm a techno-optimist, but how it can be used to help us see things that humanly are very challenging to see. The language models, am I going on too long?
No, can I interrupt just for a second? Sure. Do you think of it more as not only being synthetic, trying to learn insights from the data through AI, but also accelerating learning?
Yeah,
the
absolutely,
pace, velocity of learning?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And I'm doing a little bit of work in that. I'm happy to talk about. But I think that's an interesting topic. I'm also interested in the second component of the competencies that I identified, and that's the willingness to take action. And one of the things, some of you may know, I've had a podcast since 2019, and it's really been my different way of conducting research. I interview entrepreneurs. I've got almost 200 now. And, I decided to democratize my interviews instead of interviewing them and then translating them back to people. Anybody can listen to them. And it's a rich data set for me now. With AI, it just has become much easier to transcribe all that and understand what the trends are. I mean, that's what those languages do, what AI does. And then the third is the willingness or the resilience to execute past failure. So that was a thing that I saw that entrepreneurs did. They saw opportunities, they took action, and they execute past failure. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for research in resilience, how we think about failure. If you go back and you understand the roots of the word, we've totally botched it up, and we use it in ways that we shouldn't be using failure. We've personalized it. And so I think we need to rethink that. Failure is a learning as a way of learning, but also the cultural impact. Having a lot of international students, failure is viewed very differently in different countries. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I'm very interested in this whole idea of using podcasts as a way of learning. And some of you know, I think that I wrote a paper about pedagogy, and I also trademarked that name, the pedagogy being the art and science of teaching and learning through podcasts. And, if we learned anything from the last election, it was the impact that podcasts can have on people. So there's a high percentage of people that are learning through podcasts. I don't know about you all, but I go to podcasts to learn about things. So I'm very interested in that, and I'm interested in how we can use that. One of my big interests now, at this stage of my career, is thinking about some of the things that I lacked as I was going through. I've been doing this a long time, and it was female role models. And so I'm very interested in looking at at helping women, especially women that are already in other careers, but they want to make a transition in their lives, helping them adopt an entrepreneurial mindset to do so, because I think it's an amazing transformational tool. So that's kind of my, one more thing I'll mention. Some of you also know that I'm on boards. I do corporate boards, and I'm currently recently elected chair of a $2.5 billion international company, and I am in a lot of rooms with corporate board members, public company corporate board members, and amazingly, on corporate boards where there's little room for creativity. They're talking about we all need to have more of an entrepreneurial mindset. So I think there's some research opportunities there about how an entrepreneurial mindset. I can say this, I've been on a number of corporate boards. I've been on startup boards before that, but companies of all sizes now. Looking back, I first started teaching in Cincinnati back in 1994, and I had a lot of students in my class from Procter & Gamble and other big corporates, because Cincinnati is full of corporates, companies, and they would not pay for the graduate students to take an entrepreneurship elective at that time. That's totally changed. And so entrepreneurial mindset in more corporate settings, I think, is another. It's completely unrelated to some of the earlier stuff I mentioned, but that's sort of been my life. I'm all over the place. So.
Well, no, not at all. As a matter of fact, on the work on pedagogy, I find, the first generation of qualitative research was based on scripts, looking at text. And we now are looking at rigorous data collection methods using storytelling. Yep. Storytelling can be a data collection tool. Yep. How many of you are leveraging that in your research? I think it's pretty common. So I really appreciate what you're doing to push that envelope, and I think we can learn a great deal. And the emulation component does put it into action as well.
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
We're building an AI bot right now, so if anybody's interested at all in looking at what I'm building, I'd love to share it. And get your feedback. And on these, the podcast is called The In Factor, so think like the X Factor, only EN Factor. Yeah. And I look at entrepreneurial mindset, and all of my interviews delve in onto those three areas of opportunity recognition, taking action, and executing past failure.
Rebecca's a very privileged researcher because she is built not only with, she's been given the opportunity to work with a group of people that have let her realize the potential of her own ideas. And if you visit her at the University of Tampa, the Laus Center for Entrepreneurship, it is a laboratory for best-in-class teaching and learning of entrepreneurship. So I'd highly recommend if anyone is inclined to go visit Rebecca in her setting.
Thank you. Thank you,
and another person I would cite who has this equally type of compelling situation is Jeff Hornsby. Jeff is probably running one of the largest research groups in entrepreneurship at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and has been a long-term partner of your next-door neighbor, Kauffman Foundation. However, it has built an intellectual powerhouse over at UMKC. So thank you for sharing your ideas, Jeff.
Thanks, Ted. We have a good research shop, but nothing like IU. And what they do, #1 research entrepreneurship school. They're a good model to try to follow and catch up. I thought we could learn a little bit about entrepreneurship research and entrepreneurship education research and entrepreneurship education in general by looking back a little bit before we go forward. So I work with my visiting scholar from Nord University, who's with us at UMKC right now, who's really into AI and bibliometric analysis. And we look back over the last 5 years of entrepreneurship research in most of the mainstream journals, and almost 5,000 articles. And we found 10 clusters. This is a laundry list. If you want, there's a whole slide deck on this with a lot of detail. Email me and I'll get it to you. But the 10 clusters that we focused on, the first one was looking at behaviors and the impact of the digital turn on that. We've started looking at the psychological dimensions of entrepreneurs, but now the impact of AI and other digital and technology assets that come to bear. Second, digital transformation of entrepreneurial finance. We talked a little bit about that, but just things like crowdfunding and all the various crowdfundings, and also the different programs, a lot of them in Kansas City, that have come up to fund under-resourced entrepreneurs. And how that plays, the special funds. I know Kauffman's been involved in helping set up several of those, and there's other venture funds that are doing that too. Number 3, entrepreneurship under fire. Here we're looking at the issues of what stresses the entrepreneurial process. Obviously, one hot topic over the last 5 years was COVID, and there's been special issues and a lot of things on that. Burnout, health concerns, and entrepreneurial disparity amongst under-resourced entrepreneurs. Fourth was going beyond looking at entrepreneurs as economic actors. Entrepreneurs are individuals, they're teams. And so we need to look at them as more complex and the issues that relate to that actually impact the whole success of the entrepreneurial process in general. Number 5, family business entrepreneurship. I'm surprised by, in my own school, we don't have a family business course. We cover it in a couple courses, but we do not have one. But they represent 70% of the firms worldwide. So when I saw that statistic, I thought that was really amazing. And there are challenges because dealing with your family business, I grew up in 2 family businesses, and the whole issue of the digital impact on family businesses. And related to that is, what they call the paradoxical resilience. They need to innovate, but they also are strong, sturdy firms. And a lot of the reasons why they succeed over the long run is because they don't have stockholders. They keep the investment. They can withstand a lot of ebbs and flows with that. And then intersectional identity issues in work. Minority entrepreneurship, refugee entrepreneurship, women entrepreneurs, necessity entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs. I could probably go on. And we're looking at more of the different types of entrepreneurs that are out there and need to understand that more. Number 7, the Entrepreneurial University, which touches a lot of us here. And universities are transitioning from being knowledge creators to ecosystem orchestrators or impactors. And what is that role, and how do we do that? I don't think we have a clear pathway yet. Some universities are doing a great job at that. But a lot of us who are focusing more on tech transfer, technology development, and IP and all that, are still finding our way with how that all works and how that spills over into the community. And then the stubborn gap, the issues of gender and entrepreneurial justice and those things that people are kind of slow to move toward. And how do we look at the issues of diversity? I know that's a tough word to say right now, but we know the research on diversity, and actually in some in entrepreneurship, diverse entrepreneurial teams are more successful than individuals or teams that are less diverse. There's a lot of research there, but we need more and more of that. The complex knowledge dynamics of what drives, someone already mentioned this, what's driving ecosystems, and especially successful ecosystems. What about cross-sector collaborations within those ecosystems? And so those issues. The number 10, the whole issue of the digital ecosystems, sustainability, how do you integrate systems thinking, digital transformation, sustainability, especially we're all being held to the UN's SDGs and all that. So how is that all playing the role? It's a major role in our AACSB accreditation process now. So that's where the research is going. And the question I have there for that is, after I finish here in a minute, where are the gaps? Or are we studying the wrong things or the right things? But I want to refer to Johan Wicklund and his colleagues in a recent editorial in the Entrepreneurship Education and Pedagogy, talked about the need to integrate more entrepreneurship research into entrepreneurship education, which I think is a major theme here. He recommended 4 things, and I'm going to add a 5th. One, he mentioned, suggested less focus on performance and more on the individual. We talk about the impact of the decision. Well, let's study that decision. Let's break that down more and understand how individuals make decisions and the whole creative thinking process, design thinking process, and all those things. Number 2, since most startups are team-based, we need more research on teams. And Ted, you said that to me this morning, just in an off-the-cuff discussion about something else. And we need to better understand the importance of context in entrepreneurship. And 4th, we need more research on action-based approaches to entrepreneurship education. We talk about, we're all experientially based now. We place our students in entrepreneurial ventures to get experience. We have students do startups in college, whether they're going to be successful or not. Some are, a lot of them aren't. But are those programs that we're doing and the co-curricular programs we're doing, how are they impacting the effectiveness or efficacy of our education? And I'll add a fifth one because it was Rebecca in that meeting she called together that instigated my interest in the entrepreneurial competency area. And I started working with Mark Schenkel and Rodney D'Souza, scholars at Belmont and TCU, and now adding on Don Siegel and Maribel Guerrero from ASU. But putting together a model of the entrepreneurial process and where competencies fit in. There's a lot of work in a qualitative study done called the EntreComp study. A lot of you in Europe know this. And they found 3 meta-competencies of opportunity recognition, readiness, and opportunity exploitation. But there's several sub-competencies. But how does that fit in our traditional entrepreneurial process model? Now, Don and I have done a few of those in ETP and other areas. But if we can come up with how that all fits and what the actual competencies are these, they did not empirically test these. These are qualitatively derived. And we need more work on empirically testing this and see what happens. I do know in a prolific study that I did with Brian Anderson he's now at KU, was at our shop before that, but looking at several, developed whole scale, several items, 40 some odd items. And when we did the prolific study, the factor analysis clustered down to 2, opportunity recognition and exploitation. But there was a readiness component in the exploitation that we found. So I think there's something there. But the key is how do we implement that and where does it fit in the entrepreneurial process? How do we as educators, not just academic educators, but accelerator program providers and others, utilize and understand the competencies we're trying to build for a more effective entrepreneurship. So.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a real contribution. I really appreciate you putting it also in the context of the historical kind of clustering, the fact that we are now in a position that we can start to integrate entrepreneurship research into the learning process and accelerate our learning by integrating our best. That's a great call to action for all of us if you think about it. And it almost tees up Don Karatko almost perfectly because you've spent a career, Don, building a sense of how we can bring about entrepreneurial mindset and performance in your work, both at Kelley School and as a scholar. I'm really looking forward to this next commentary because this is a career of work that, and this is your home. When I found out that GEC was going to be in Indiana, the first person I thought of was Don Karatko. And sure enough, I spoke to Don Karatko 2 days later. And Don was like, well, yeah, I guess it's happening. I don't know what's happening with it, but I'll be there. And this is the moment I was hoping I would give Don to share kind of a retrospective view of what he's done in his career and where he'd like to see our research community go.
Well, thank you, Ted. It's an honor to be here. Great to have everyone here in the state of Indiana. So welcome to everybody. I'm sure at this point of our session, you're all brain drained. And so we had some truly insightful comments from some brilliant people. I will probably not be insightful nor brilliant, but just a couple things I wanted to mention that's been said today on a lot of these topics. There's a lot of culpability to the problem that we're seeing in entrepreneurship research. Norris mentioned the journals, the editors and the reviewers. Absolutely true. There's a real problem. And Sammy was alluding to that as well. Universities, some of our top universities are culpable. They don't respect entrepreneurship. They don't want PhD students from entrepreneurship. On their journal list, they don't have entrepreneurship journals on their list. I can tell you that. And they put out their own studies about the top schools that do research, and they make sure that they don't include anybody in entrepreneurship. So they're culpable to what's going on here. So there's a lot of culpability that goes on. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to tackle it. I started this 40 years ago, and when I came into the field, there was no field academically in entrepreneurship. No respect for it whatsoever. I think we've come a long way, and sometimes I think we still have a long way to go. We still have a lot of obstacles and challenges that we're going to have to do, even before we get it translated to our audiences. And then I also wanted to mention that universities have tried, for example, the California Management Review the Sloan Management Review, Business Horizons, have all been journals that were started for the purpose of trying to translate academic research to the actual practitioners. And yet I will tell you that at no university that I know of that's well respected are those journals counted. So therefore, how do you expect researchers to do that when the universities don't count them? And the tenure clock ticks fast. These young people, I'm turning out PhD students. And so we know that where we put them, that tenure clock is ticking fast. And journals move slow. And journals have also moved into, it used to be, for those of us old enough to remember, if you got an R&R, revise and resubmit, did a good job, you're probably going to get a conditional acceptance, and then it's going to get in. Today, I can tell you, we've had experiences of going 3 rounds of reviews and getting rejected. Now, for a young person, that is career damaging because they will not get their tenure. So we've got a major problem. I'm glad Norris brought it up and Sammy, because I think the journals are a real problem right now, and that's got to be attacked. That's got to be changed in some way. So those are some of the things I just see. A couple other thoughts I have. When we're trying to see how entrepreneurship research can make a difference, yes, it can. I'm sorry it's hard to spell, Daniel, and hard to say, but I hope to God your comment wasn't taken wrongly by saying let's get rid of entrepreneurship. I hope, I don't want to waste my 40 years, but I know you didn't mean it that way. You meant it as an outcome. I do understand. But one of my dear colleagues and dear friends, Michael Morris at the University of Notre Dame, right here in the state of Indiana, has been moving on a whole concept of looking at entrepreneurship to resolve poverty conditions and stuff. And so he took his research, and I've worked on some work with him. And we did it because we were told, a comment I heard some years ago by an older professor said, I would never let my students work on SLBs. And I looked at him and said, what are SLBs? He goes, shitty little businesses. That was his attitude, and that's what he was taking into the classroom. And so Michael and I wrote a book. It's published by Edward Elgar called What Do Entrepreneurs Create? And we put a typology in there of the different forms and types of firms, going from survival all the way to exponential growth, but showing how they're all valuable to the economy. You can't just harness just the Silicon Valley model. That's just not enough. And one that we found in Mike's work with the poverty situation is something that Chad brought up. It was contextual. In the poverty situation, there's a liability, we always talk about in small firms, liability of newness, liability of smallness. There's also liability of poorness. And that deals with the context of what has to be resolved before they can actually get into the business sector. We also discovered 2 other things. One was self-sabotage. Why? Why would they self-sabotage themselves when trying to start a business? Because of what we called a fear of success. Because the culture that they're actually in their context, and how they're going to be viewed. So these are some of the interesting things that are going on, I think, in the research. The question is, will we get some of this into the journals? Jeff's point about all the things he just brought up, which were outstanding. Will we get them in the journals? Will we get them translated? A lot of people talk about translation. Will we get them translated? These are still, to me, the challenges that lie ahead for the entrepreneurship scholars. No question about it. So I heard some years ago someone said, the battle's over. Entrepreneurship's won. And Howard Stevenson at Harvard said, winning a battle is not without its consequences and challenges that lie ahead. And I think that's where we're at right now. I want to state what I said earlier. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And it's really, I think, a group convening like this that starts the process. Because we all start to listen to each other. We start to share the problems, even the complaints, as Daniel did, which is great. But I think this is where it has to start. And we all have to be committed, and I hope we are. Thank you, Ted, for having me here today.
Fantastic. Well, that doesn't get your dander up. This is a great time. So we've heard from the 3 scholars, and we have a couple hands. I'm going to invite everyone to comment on what has just been said. And please, Kelly, I want to make time for you as well. Back here, real quick.
All right, thank you so much, Ted, and thanks so much for the comments, Prof. Dunn. So, my name is Sean Richards. I'm from Canada. I'm doing a PhD on interdisciplinary study on entrepreneurship, innovation, and sustainability. And how this can help build resilient ecosystems, right? Looking at how in the last 10 years, the world has faced several crises, from the pandemic. Right now we're having a whole economic challenge globally. So that's where I'm focused. But right now, I'm drawing up from Don's statements on the availability of journals in the field of entrepreneurship. Looking at it, the FC50 journals, I think just one that's focused on entrepreneurship. So, as a researcher, I'm looking at how can we, help to get more journals on the FC50. And also, maybe just a suggestion, Jeff is not here, but I was thinking, about the startup genome research. How can those research findings and reports, made more academic? Because I shared some with my professors at the university. I also lecture at the University of Victoria, and also volunteer with the University of Calgary as an entrepreneur advisor. And I really loved those journals and those reports. So I'm just curious, how can, a couple of all the works that have been shown on this table, and amazing comments as well from Rebecca White. I saw your podcast, which is, I'm following right now, and also from Josh Lena, if I'm right here. So that's my question. How can we get more journals on entrepreneurship? Thank you.
Who would like to address that? Anybody would like to comment on that? Kelly?
I hope this won't keep me from making my other comments, but...
No, not at all. In fact, keep going.
Jerry Katz has a list of, if I remember the number even close to being right, 150 journals that take research in entrepreneurship. So I would suggest that the last thing we need is more journals. But I will now make three sort of unrelated comments. It's not just journals. So comment number one is, it's deans. Because those of us who are in business schools or have been know that there's a reason that deans don't like the discipline. A, we're wild and crazy and don't do what we are told to do. And B,
yes,
what we do is bring in all the money. And so the combination of our alums who endow buildings with our students and with us that they don't think are really doing real work, that's why deans don't like us. If we're concerned about the journals, we probably ought to look in the mirror, because who are the reviewers and who are the editors? Most of the researchers in this room have been one or the other or both multiple times. So I don't want to think of the reviewers and editors of journals as being the enemy, which is how come I settle on deans. Okay.
Non-human targets.
Sure. You must have met my last dean. Thank God I retired. I retired before he could get to me. When we talk about the social value of entrepreneurship education, I've always told my classes that I would be quite happy with two outcomes in their learning. One is they get sufficiently excited and sufficiently capable that they want to run right out and start a business. That would be wonderful. The other is that they discover it's a hell of a lot of work. I'm going to go get a corporate job where I don't have to work that hard. That, too, is an excellent outcome because it saves the society from wasting money on a to-be failed business. And so I'll bet you if those of you who are entrepreneurship teachers look at the variance in your student ratings from your entrepreneurship courses to any other course you teach, you will find that the variance is higher in the entrepreneurship courses and more likely to be bipolar. And the third thing that I will say is, okay, watch out, this is advertising. Okay. Thanks to the intervention of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, my company amassed 4,500 survey research responses in South Africa and Bahrain together. And the results of those interviews, they were all interviews. There are several characteristics. One is that the folks were randomly selected. These are not people who are chosen on the basis of some participation on a list. All phone interviews, professional interviewers. Another is that the data are separately calibrated for men and women, which is rare. And we all know that the word entrepreneur is heavily masculinized. So if we take a ruler designed for men and try to measure women with it, it's not going to work. And as a consequence of this, we're now getting to the last word I want to give you, the true advertisement. In 2024, Edward Elgar published my book, and I think it's kind of funny that I was able to finish it after I retired from the university, called The Psychological Foundations of the Entrepreneurial Mindset. So if you want to talk about mindset, I have something you maybe ought to read.
Actually, I'm going to put some color on that, if you don't mind. I'm going to just take the privilege of being in the chair here for a moment. Just permit me. So Kelly Shaver, somebody, I can probably track back my interest in entrepreneurship to Kelly Shaver. I remember he was a young, spry professor at my undergraduate institution.
Yeah, man, spry.
And he was driving a really cool car.
That was a long time ago.
He was really an amazing man, and he continued to be an amazing man. Has had probably one of the most prolific academic careers of any person here. Probably more prolific than anyone here. Has probably had more published papers. Probably has had more impact as a scholar on the entrepreneurship field. Well, I don't. All those can be disputed. We can get out our impact factors and look at bibliographies and CVs. But my takeaway is that I remember during COVID, one of the coping mechanisms I used was to reach out to Kelly, and Kelly reached out to me, and we just kind of gathered up enough steam. And Kelly was struggling with, whether or not he would write his magnum opus. And I said, there's no other human being on the planet who could write that book, and Kelly did it. So not only should I recommend.
But that was the motivation behind
And it was so critical that we have that in the world now, thanks to Kelly Shaver and his career. I'd like to ask everyone to give Kelly a standing ovation. Thank you, everybody. It's my honor to, if this was the kind of event I imagined I would have, this is exactly what it's transpired to be. I hope you all have taken away a day of very rich insight on the aspirations we all have and the ambitions of our field. I hope that we served up some very provocative thinking, but I want to promise you all that these words aren't just going to be uttered here and then forgotten. They will be documented, they will be shared, they will be brought forward as the first step of an iteration toward repositioning GERN as that translational lever in the research community. And I would really ask all of my colleagues to lean in with me on that. All of you have lived this and have made careers out of this kind of work. And I hope that we'll continue this fertile network of practitioners and researchers working together to make our discipline better. I'm going to attempt to highlight some of the key themes I learned today as a summary. And I'll probably only do it at about a B level, so we'll see. A few key themes: leveraging evaluation, not as just a tool to improve performance of programs, but as a research base, to engage practitioners meaningfully in a proactive manner and program leaders to collect data to derive insights that not only improve the treatment of the program and the outcome sought, but to bring about researchable patterns that will be ultimately baselined into our knowledge of entrepreneurship. And I want to credit Amelia and John for bringing that to our attention, and to even go further, to produce a common language among researchers, practitioners, and policymakers that we can all interact in a way that we're working on a common song sheet. And I want to credit Eric and Rebecca for having brought that point to the table. The second point is leveraging data sets in all forms, commercial data sets like what JF had mentioned that we build ourselves, panel studies like what Kelly had mentioned, now AI as a way to accelerate learning, and Rebecca's pedagogy, taking the qualitative methods to the next level. I just want to credit David, Josh, and Rebecca for your insights there. The third theme is respecting qualitative research for explorational studies, for theory development, for hypothesis creation, for research targeting and navigation, including potentially rigorous methods that would underpin these qualitative approaches, knowing that data is not perfect and never will be. I think we all can appreciate that. You know, I really appreciate the people that work in the census tract data to produce some very interesting outcomes, but I must tell you that some of the most interesting insights I've found is from rigorous qualitative approaches. I'd credit Eric, Sammy, John, Rebecca, and Jeff for bringing that to the table. A big focus today on policy responsive research, first called on by Sammy, then followed up by John, and then the comment from, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name, sir, but Agile Research, thank you. What's your name? Okay, thank you very much for being responsive to the needs today, given the seismic changes that are occurring on our economy. And I don't believe this is going to change. You know, our research model is a 5-year model. We don't have that luxury any longer. The speed of information is, half-life of information is changing dramatically. All of us are outmoded if we rely on our own wits. We have to rely on each other and our research community. The next point would be a focus on entrepreneurship as and this is probably the most important thing. Eric, you mentioned at the very beginning, you're the first person, and it was followed up by multiple comments. Focus on entrepreneurship as a path to human flourishing, to poverty, a reduction of poverty, and as a way to ameliorate wealth inequality, to bring about balanced opportunity and the general well-being economically and otherwise of our people. And many people made that point. There was a really interesting set of commentary that I want to go back and probe in the white paper we'll put out on targeting selection. That point was made by several of the respondents. And then the question of more and better data. Josh, I want to thank you for making that friendly amendment, that it's more than just the scope, but it's also the quality of that data. And I think going into really now important primordial things, I'm not done yet, focusing on the people, their context, the barriers, the pathways, the inequalities. I want to credit Sammy, Rebecca, and Don for bringing that table up, that to the table. I want to credit our researcher from Johns Hopkins, and your name is, Miss? Anita. I think we all need to learn from Anita and her colleagues on how to do translation, but looking at now a revised clinical model for entrepreneurship research, fusing our discipline and ultimately developing routines of translation. Many of us brought up the issue, and thank you for that contribution, bridge to journal editors, reviewers, and the academy in general that, and Don pointed out, that have maybe a paucity of respect, appropriate respect for entrepreneurship. That came up from Norris and Jeff and Don and Sammy. Many of us, Jeff Hornsby, Rebecca White talked about, and now, of course, Kelly Shaver, who has been the father of the psychology of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurial mindset is an enabler, and the competencies to back that mindset, understanding the elements that bring it together. So thank you for that contribution. I've already made this point, but I think I want to credit Eric now emphasizing it by saying a focus on human opportunity, the importance of our work being focused on human opportunity, taking a step back to understand how to make our world a better place. How do we create better options for tomorrow to increase structural change, to bring about, opportunity, prosperity, economic well-being, probably more importantly, flourishing. And I credit Eric for saying that. I really credit Daniel for saying, okay, let's bitch for a little bit. There are a lot of complaints all of us have, and we could go on ad nauseum about the complaints we'd have. And it was punctuated by Don at the end saying, fundamentally, we've got to change the way we are viewed by our power structure. And many of us outlined great opportunities for us to operate. That brings us to a call to action. I started the meeting by saying, I was kind of reverse analyzing how the academic discipline is organized and where does GERN fit in. Do you all believe that there's a role for GERN in being that translational enabler with the academic community? And would you invest in that focus for the GERN community? Are you raising your hand to say yes?
Well, this may be my last opportunity. I didn't know we were allowed to complain.
Yeah, yeah, I can't open that up,
I'm not
unfortunately.
going to be as good as Don or Dan, but there is one thing that has been lurking beneath there and it sort of bothered me. One thing as a field we're criticized for, that we are kind of not into theory. And when I've been a reviewer or a guest editor, I've been criticized for rejecting a paper because it had no theory, the wrong theory, or just a shitty theory. That maybe we should be, I don't want to say we should be held to a higher standard, but yeah, maybe, if we're not getting respected, then we have to, oh God, sorry. I'm not looking good on camera here. But
who does?
That the fact that I involved in a systematic literature review on the impact of entrepreneurship education on the students, and every one of them used the intentions model, and when Isaac Adjan heard it, he almost had a coronary. Now, I get a lot of citations, but that most out of 104 we looked at, 4 had actual theory. And these are all published in good journals. But we have a lot to draw on. I mean, Kelly and Robert Barron opened the door on the psychological side. There are people sitting around with MRI machines waiting for us to give them good questions, as long as we bring a lot of money. But one thing to add is you could, yes, the translational, but I think there's I don't know, what's the right word? We're the champion for taking research to the next level. Yeah. Let's be rigorous. Let's find if we can't find the theory, can't apply it, start creating, something that is ours. And yeah, I like Don. I like people publish in CMR. It's in the Financial Times 50, and the schools go nah. Yeah. I was ready to attack, charge a hill by the time Don was done. Yeah. But I think that we have this sort of, I don't want to say this moral compass that we can make a difference in terms of more better research.
Yeah,
it's not just translate. I mean, before you can translate, you got to have the stuff we study. There's some badass stuff we should be doing.
No doubt. You know, there's some best practices too that we've started. I see real leadership here. You know, Rebecca's work with qualitative area, Sammy's work in engaging in policy, Dan's work engaged deeply in the economy. You know, in certain regions to understand them intrinsically. I could go on with citations after citations of best practices. OECD and Eric's work collaboratively, those are best practices. My gut feel is that we have to now celebrate them, and we need to create a community that translation is actually an important component of the research expectation and responsibility, because ultimately, what is our North Star? It's making our world a better place. And I think we're all committed there. Please, Kelly.
I think you can answer your own question. Is there another organization in entrepreneurship that is international, contains researchers and practitioners who are willing to talk to each other? Think about it. Name another.
By the way, I did want to call out Josh and David Sue. One of the I want to give you both credit in your area. You're both top finance professors. And the fact that you started writing papers in entrepreneurship really did a lot to help us. I want to thank you and your community. And we heard the word Schumpeter, or however you pronounce Schumpeterian thought, uttered in this room. But you know, we are of course all embedded in theory. We need to be embedded in theory. But we also are a practice that's embedded in action. And we have to be engaged. So anyways, I hope you join us in this direction. I want to defer to my friend Tom Hancock. Tom has quietly pulled the strings for me. And I'm his puppet in a lot of ways. You know, I mean, honestly, Tom is a brilliant young researcher, and he's done a massive amount of work to engage. I'd like to ask Tom just to close us out, give us a closing prayer, and also to share a little bit about next steps.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, I mean, it's been a tremendous honor to listen to this debate, some incredible discussions, and a really special 3 hours we've spent. There's a lot of work that GERN wants to do, and there's some really interesting ideas that we would like to build on. Please talk to me after this session or in the coming days about that, or even after GEC by email, tom@genglobal.org. I don't want to keep people from Brad Feld on the main stage, which is, I think, starting right now, but I just want to finish by saying a huge thank you to Ted, who got in at 2 a.m. this morning and has delivered an amazing performance. So a big round of applause for Ted.
And how about a round of applause? How about a round of applause for Tom and Matt and the crew that put this together?
I want to echo too what Tom and Matt were mentioning. Anyone who wants to join me in writing this up and maybe even turning it into a publishable piece, please see me. So thank you, everyone, for joining us and for making a commitment to our research community. And let's make it happen.